Good morning. Good morning. I know that there's about 3 other meetings. Our chapter leaders are meeting. They'll be joining us now, but we wanted to start as we're gathering with our first plenary speaker because he went out of his way to adjust his schedule and he has to get back to Washington. And his area is so important to us that we want to make sure we hear from him. And we're honored that he took time to come from Washington to be with us. He and I were together last week when they signed the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill, and he has been. And as he and I said, and the president said, it took too long to get there, but thank God it is there. And let me say, as we hear from Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services, I think if anything showed the disparity and inequality in health care in this country, the pandemic did that. I think that we've been saying this for years, and it almost sounded like a cliche. But I think when we saw how some communities were better served and had more institutional infrastructure to deal with it than others, then people began understanding that what we'd said was not rhetoric. Now let us remember that the question of inequality was something that was inherited by this administration, and that they need to work with us and we need to work with them to redo things. Sometimes people forget that they have only been in office a little over a year, and we cannot expect to undo decades without real work, but that takes partnership. You know, we're the experts at protest, but we also must be the experts at building what we're protesting about. And that's why we wanted many of the cabinet members there. So it's my honor to bring the 25th Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Secretary Javier Becerra.
Reverend, thank you very much for having me. Good morning to everyone. Good morning. Yeah, that's right. You're here. You're here. I want to also acknowledge a partner and one of the leaders in this country on health care who is leading the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, makes it possible for us to have programs like Medicaid for millions of Americans, has made it possible for us to reach communities that are usually left behind. Chiquita Brooks-LaSure, who is here, is the first African-American woman to serve as the administrator of this major agency. And she's doing it fairly well, too. My friends, this is 2022, and America is living and fighting through a pandemic. People are still dying. People are still saying some crazy things related to this pandemic. And no surprise, at least not to those of us in this room who know all too well and too personally who gets hit the hardest by this pandemic. Right? So I hope you're listening to me because I have to tell you about another pandemic. Put that one aside for just a second. The next pandemic I have to tell you about because I'm the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And that's this pandemic that we call COVID-19. COVID-19 is also killing us. COVID-19 is also giving us people who are saying some crazy things. And COVID-19 is hitting us harder than most. But it's the first pandemic I think I want to talk to you about, and that's the pandemic of racism, right? And if you were listening to me, you probably thought I was going to talk to you about something else, about COVID. You and I know a lot about COVID. We have family members who can tell us some sad stories about COVID. But I think it's important as the President's chief officer to deal with health that we talk about that pandemic that's lasted a lot longer than COVID in our lives, because racism affects our health every day. And so I want to thank you for letting me be here and talk to you about that pandemic. That pandemic, like the COVID pandemic, we've seen in many stages, right? Many variants, right? Remember, it was states' rights, then it became Jim Crow, then it was separate but equal. Now, I think you can see it in parts of the country coming out again. Now it looks like, well, don't teach the past, right? Some people are telling you that it's okay to mislabel the truth. They talk to you about socializing alternative facts. And these waves kill. They may not kill immediately. You may not see it in front of you. But when someone tells you that we should not teach the full truth of the past, they're asking you to forget what killed so many of us. And we'll do it in the future. And so it is important to talk about what we are doing at the Department of Health and Human Services, Reverend Sharpton, today here speaking to the National Action Network, because Administrator Brooks LaSure and I have an obligation to deal with all pandemics, not just the one we call COVID-19. And so I am honored and privileged to have a chance to speak to you about what we're doing at the Department of Health and Human Services to address the pandemic, the real pandemic. When I came to the position as secretary about a year ago, 63% of white adults in America had received a dose of the vaccine. That number was less than 53% for black adults. And that's not right. Today, we've worked for a year, administrator and I and others at HHS. Today, about 84% of white adults have received at least one dose of the vaccine. And today, more than 86% of black adults have received a dose of the vaccine. We more than closed the gap that existed a year ago. This progress didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen overnight. It happened because we engaged community leaders like you throughout the country to help us. It happened because of strong leadership at the White House, and it happened because of some bold investments that we made. Waiting for underserved communities to find us, that was then. We go where you are. That is now. That is now. We pumped $7.3 billion into communities that have community health centers, where so many of our families get their care. Those community health centers have administered nearly 19 million vaccines to Americans. Actually, more than 2 out of every 3 of those Americans from communities of color. We partnered with health and service organizations from communities of color as well. We paid to advertise about vaccine promotion into the black community directly, and we use marketers who come from the community to do that. Beyond COVID, we expanded healthcare access for millions of Americans. A record 14.5 million Americans today have signed up for Obamacare. Never before have those numbers been that high. And today, those Americans, and a great number because we elevated the numbers for Black and Latinos beyond what they've ever been, today those Americans live not just with health insurance, but with the peace of mind that they can take their child to the hospital and not worry about going bankrupt afterwards. And even in the midst of a pandemic, we have reduced the number of uninsured Americans in this country by more than 20 million. And I got to tell you, if you do that, you're reaching Black and Latino families. And so we continue to do what we must to fight this pandemic. As the husband of an obstetrician gynecologist, I'm particularly proud of the focus that we are putting on maternal health, especially with a laser focus on maternal morbidity and mortality. Because we know in some parts of this country, to certain communities, especially the Black and Native American community, we have conditions which rival those in developing countries when it comes to the conditions a woman and her baby will find herself in right after birth. And so we are going to devote millions of dollars to reach, once again, not wait for them to come to us, but go to them to make sure we are servicing Black mothers and Black newborns. And we are ready, and I hope you will help us with this. Starting this month, we launched an effort to get 720,000 pregnant and postpartum care women across America guaranteed access to Medicaid and children's health services for coverage from not just 60 days to 1 full year for those women and their children. So work with us on that. We're not finished. We have a lot to do. And I am the Secretary of Health and Human Services, so I have to say, continue to help us get your families vaccinated to fight COVID. But what I want to tell you as someone who grew up in a home where his parents told him about how they could not walk into restaurants or establishments at a time when the signs would read no Negroes or Mexicans allowed. It is time for us to move beyond thinking just COVID as our pandemic. It is time for us to realize that many have been suffering from pandemics for a long time. And I hope that you will remember something that was said by a dear friend and colleague for 24 years in Congress and an American hero, John Lewis, said, if we want to make a difference, we got to get into good trouble. And I urge all of us to remember what John Lewis said, or as my dad would say it, tienes que tener ganas. You have to have ganas. G-A-N-A-S. Look it up. It's not going to be the same thing as what I think it means, what my parents taught me. Ganas in Spanish, you'll look it up in the dictionary, may say desire. To me, it's gut, grit, and game all packaged in one. And so I urge each and every one of you, as we go about staying safe from COVID, let's keep battling that other pandemic, which we know has been pervasive in America for far too long, and that is racism. Let us do what John Lewis said. Let us get into good trouble. And as my dad said, let's have ganas as we do it. You all, thank you very much for letting me be here. Reverend, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Secretary Becerra, give him a hand. Let us hear now from who he mentioned. Chiquita Brooks LaSure is the first Black woman to serve as administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where she will oversee programs including Medicare, Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program known as CHIP, and healthcare.gov health insurance in the marketplace. Let us hear from Chiquita Brooks LaSure.
It is wonderful to be here at the National Action Network Conference. Thank you so much, Reverend Al Sharpton, for the invitation to join you all today and for your lifelong leadership fighting for justice. I also really want to start by thanking all of you, that organized and got the word out about enrolling in coverage. I am honored to be here today alongside so many civil rights leaders and defenders of justice in our country. As the Secretary said, my name is Chiquita Brooks LaShore, and I am the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, often known as CMS. CMS provides coverage to more than 150 million people across the country through our programs. I like to say the 3 M's: Medicare, Medicaid and CHIP, and the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, like healthcare.gov. CMS is the country's largest payer of healthcare. When we talk about building a more equitable healthcare system, we mean it. I want to share with you about how privileged I feel to be leading CMS, an agency that is working tirelessly to advance equitable care for all people in this country. I've spent my adult life and career fighting for health equity. After graduate school, I went to work at the White House Office of Management and Budget. I traveled out to Montana in my first trip to a community health center so I could see healthcare policy in action. Montana had just introduced its children's health insurance program. I was truly moved as I watched families in the clinic enrolling their children into health coverage. I was inspired to realize what healthcare meant for these families and what it meant to reduce the number of uninsured and underserved children. Health coverage means better health. It means peace of mind, economic security, brighter futures. I believe strongly that everyone deserves comprehensive health coverage and everything that comes along with it. Historically, Medicare and Medicaid have been pivotal in fighting for the people's right to health care and disrupting systemic racism in health care. Flashback 57 years ago, after the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and you'd see hospitals in the South still operating under Jim Crow laws, either refusing Black patients entirely or segregating them to the basement and providing inequitable care. Meanwhile, in the North, African American patients were sent away from hospitals dominated by whites to either county hospitals or historically Black institutions, which often operated with fewer resources. This is not ancient history. When my own daughter was born 8 years ago, my husband was out getting something and he met with a couple of women who were in their 60s who lived a mile from the hospital that I delivered my daughter. And he asked, they had lived there their whole lives, and he asked, were they born at that hospital? And they said, no, we weren't allowed, our mothers weren't allowed to deliver there. So this is still very much part of our current history. It wasn't until the passage of Medicare in 1965 when Medicare threatened to withhold funding from hospitals practicing racial discrimination, and this practice changed almost immediately. In more recent history, the Great Recession of 2008 brought us the Affordable Care Act and another opportunity for CMS to bridge the gaps in healthcare. It was a time where individuals and families were facing dire economic hardship, including medical debt. Too many people were uninsured. These strains more acutely impacted the Black community and other underserved communities. Women paid more for healthcare costs just by virtue of being a woman. People lacked essential protections to receive care more equitably. The ACA responded to our country's need to provide access to affordable health care as a right, not tied to employment. Access to health coverage is foundational to eliminating health disparities. Just like we did in 1960s, CMS is working to disrupt the inequalities ingrained in our healthcare system, this time by expanding access to coverage. Since the implementation of the ACA's coverage provisions beginning in 2010, the uninsured rate among Black Americans under the age of 65 has decreased by 40%. As the Secretary mentioned, a record-breaking 14.5 million people signed up for Marketplace coverage during the last open enrollment period. In healthcare.gov states, the states that we, CMS, are responsible for enrollment among Black people increased by 35%. And so many people in this room are part of that because of your work in getting the word out. These gains add to nearly 31 million Americans enrolled in Medicaid or Affordable Care Act coverage at the beginning of 2021. Thanks to the Affordable Care Act and the Biden-Harris administration's American Rescue Plan, we've reached historic highs for people in health coverage. From the passage of Medicare to the Affordable Care Act, we have accomplished so much, but there is still so much more work to do. CMS is working hard to protect these gains in health coverage and to expand what the ACA started. We're working with states and Congress to permanently bridge gaps that still exist in our safety nets by expanding Medicaid coverage. We're also working to expand our country's maternal health coverage because we have a crisis, as the Secretary mentioned. Black and American Indian, Alaska Native people are up to 5 times more likely to die than their white peers. And these disparities cut across income and educational levels. CMS, through Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance programs, cover more than 40% of the nation's birth. We're working to pull out all of our levers to improve maternal health in the United States. One of my proudest moments so far as CMS administrator was the day that I stood along with the Secretary with our Vice President, Kamala Harris, as she hosted the first ever Federal Maternal Health Day of Action. And she announced a call to action to improve health outcomes for parents and infants in the United States. There, we announced how Medicare, a program that provides coverage for seniors and people with disabilities, but is the huge spender with hospitals and healthcare systems, how we're going to use it to work to improve the quality of maternal and infant health. We've introduced a new tool that assesses how birthing-friendly hospitals are to drive maternal health care quality improvement and patient safety practices in hospitals. We're also partnering with states to extend Medicaid coverage for 12 months after pregnancy. 4 states, Virginia, New Jersey, Illinois, and Louisiana, have already extended coverage, and we have more than a dozen states who are ready to partner with us on this important work. These are the tools that we will use to affect change. How a policy or initiative will advance health equity is the first question we are asking in meetings with the CMS team. We are working to design, implement, and operationalize policies and programs that support health for all people served in our programs. We're also working to make sure those people with lived experience are part of our decision-making process. The COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized what many of us already knew, that the Black community is at greater risk of severe illness and death from a variety of illnesses, not just COVID-19, due to historic inequities in access and quality of care. These failings are not new, and they didn't just appear on the heels of a pandemic. So my charge to the healthcare industry, as we learn from the pandemic in this period of transition, is to use the opportunity to advance health equity by addressing health disparities that underlie our healthcare system. Over the many decades, CMS has made history, and we will continue to work to expand healthcare coverage and access to care to improve quality and build a better healthcare system for the American people. Partners like you all, the National Action Network, trusted voices in your communities, are essential to reaching our vision. Your sacrifice and leadership through the COVID-19 pandemic has been instrumental in getting people enrolled in coverage, getting people vaccinated, and helping people find the resources that they need. Thank you again for inviting me to join you today, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much. I thought it was very important that we hear from the Secretary of Health and Human Services and from Shakita, because I think that we have to deal with the health disparities in our communities. And I think that, I did Morning Joe this morning with Mayor Adams. COVID is not over. And, every time we let our guard down, another variant comes up, which is why I keep my mask up. Because, I love hugging everybody, but you have to have your mask and your vaccine papers to hug me now. Because I really take this seriously. And when we are dealing with health deserts in our community, then that is a civil rights issue. When I started addressing it and people would say to me, oh, I thought National Action Network was a civil rights group. That is a civil rights organization. If you are in areas where you do not have health clinics or hospitals or primary care available to you and others do, that is a civil rights issue. And you just heard the Secretary of Health and Human Services say the pandemic of racism. He said this himself, dealing with the issues this morning. So I thought his address and Shakita's was very important for us to hear. Thank you very much for being here. Give her a hand again. And I thank him. He spoke and had to leave. He's meeting with the president today, but he wanted to be here to address NAN, and I'm glad. I had no idea he would come that strong about the pandemic of racism, but that's real, and we need to deal with it. Let me bring in now our next presenter, who is the Deputy Secretary at USDA, as she previously served as the 16th Commissioner in the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and we are happy to have her, the Deputy Secretary, Dr. Jewel Broder. Give her a hand as she comes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for a warm introduction, and to the National Action Network for inviting me to participate at today's convention. USDA is often referred to as the People's Department, a name that calls tribute to President Abraham Lincoln, who established the department to serve the needs of all people. To live up to this moniker, and to best serve all Americans, our department envisions an equitable and climate-smart food and agriculture economy, one that protects and improves the health and equity of life for all Americans, helps rural America thrive, cares for the land, and feeds the world. Our vision is achievable through a set of strategic priorities that we aim to carry out each and every day of this administration. We're positioning agriculture and forestry sectors and rural and tribal communities to be climate leaders through investments in research and development in climate-smart solutions. We're creating more and better markets for producers and consumers by addressing vulnerabilities in our food system and building a food system that is fair, competitive, distributed, and resilient. We're tackling food and nutrition by ensuring Americans have consistent, safe, healthy, and affordable food essential to optimal life and well-being. We are striving to ensure an exceptional work environment across the department and for our workforce. I am personally dedicated to our youth in agriculture and farming to prepare the next generation for protecting and for growing our food system, to lifting up the voices of and empowering our women agricultural leaders across the globe, and to address farmer stress and rural health disparities, especially as the food supply chain continues to be impacted by COVID-19 and the conflicts abroad. Central to the work of advancing racial justice, equity, and opportunity, and to reducing barriers to accessing USDA programs and services, we have a goal of rooting out generations of systemic racism and discrimination. And at USDA, we are already prioritizing equity. We know that the farmers' frustrations run deep and are rooted in their own daily battles as they struggle to make ends meet, to maintain their land, to put food on their tables, and to see that their children have a shot at economic prosperity. Systemic bias can flourish in practices that generally appear neutral on the surface, but all too often and for far too long, USDA programs have been designed to benefit those with land, with the experience, with the money, and with the education, while leaving behind those without means, resources, and privilege of one kind or another. For our part, USDA is taking accountability for its past history of discrimination and its role today by ensuring that leaders and programs are taking a hard look at our systems, processes, and our policies. And USDA has already taken action on equity. First, utilizing stakeholder input and internal equity assessments, USDA challenges its offices and mission areas to identify actions that will build and maintain trust, reduce barriers, and increase USDA investments in underserved communities. Each USDA office and mission area devised an equity action plan to which they will be held accountable. Second, recognizing the role of a healthy and inclusive organizational culture and the need to build an organization that reflects the communities that agencies serve, that USDA serves. And USDA developed an inward-looking DEIA strategic plan to take the necessary steps to build on an organization that centers on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in all that we do. And third, the full implementation of the $5 billion in the American Rescue Plan is central to USDA's strategy for advancing equity amongst a set of historically underserved agricultural producers. While the debt relief provisions are currently on hold due to several court-ordered preliminary injunctions, USDA is supporting the Department of Justice and the Biden-Harris administration as they continue to vigorously defend the program and determine the best path forward. At the same time, we are working hard deploying resources from the $1 billion provided to support producers on the edge and strengthen career pathways into USDA for college students who are attending minority-serving land-grant institutions. As part of this work, in late 2021, we announced $75 million to expand our partnerships with 20 trusted technical assistance providers in the coming months to ensure that underserved producers have the additional support that they need to access USDA programs. This includes addressing issues related to heirs property, improved assistance and capacity for business planning, for market development, financial knowledge, and other technical skills involved in successful farm management. And last month, we announced at least another $25 million to support the work of additional technical assistance providers, many of which we anticipate will be working closely with underserved producers in areas of the country not covered by the first set of 20 cooperators. And more resources are on the way. Goody. As authorized by the American Rescue Plan, USDA has established an equity commission comprised of external stakeholders, and I have the honor of serving as co-chair of that equity commission. I take that work very seriously, as I do all of my work in my role at USDA. The Commission and its Subcommittee on Agriculture are currently conducting a thorough review of USDA policies that will inform the development of a set of recommendations that will be provided to Secretary Vilsack for how the department and likely Congress can take action to advance equity. The goal is to provide an initial set of recommendations by late 2022. Additional recommendations are expected from the Commission's new Subcommittee on Rural and Community Economic Development, which is currently being planned. As we look forward to the Equity Commission's recommendation, the Department is committed to real action now. We will also simultaneously work to create new norms, practices, structures, and an organizational culture that consistently and systematically places equity at the center of program design, policy design, implementation, and evaluation. As a lead advocate for rural communities within the federal family, USDA is also working closely with the White House and OMB to educate colleagues across the federal government about the unique experiences and attributes of rural and tribal communities, why persistent poverty is predominant in these areas, and how attention to the details of both policy design and implementation can ensure rural and tribal communities have equitable access to federal programs and services. And based on early lessons learned, USDA staff offices in mission areas were directed to coordinate and develop their respective key actions to incorporate equity into farm, family, and food programs that touch the lives of every American. We are also doing work in the area of nutrition. Nutrition security is especially important, and we know that USDA's core nutrition programs are the most far-reaching, powerful tools available to ensure that all Americans, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity or background, have access to healthy and affordable food. We reach tens of millions of Americans through our nutrition assistance program, our programs including around 30 million children across the country each school day. But we must use the tools we already have to do a better job in reaching further into these communities with persistent poverty and tackling health disparities in the U.S. related to lack of access to healthy food. Disparities in diet-related diseases are rooted in long-standing historical inequities. As an immediate action, we provided a boost of $1 billion per month across an estimated 25 million of the lowest income SNAP participants. We are working to deploy $390 million in WIC funding provided through the American Rescue Plan. Key among our priorities, too, was and continues to be making sure that school children are fully connected to school nutrition programs, especially given the impact of the pandemic on schools' ability to access nutritious foods. We recently announced $1.5 billion in assistance to support local school meal programs facing challenges with supply chain issues. Through this effort, up to $1 billion is being provided in supply chain assistance funds to school districts that operate school meals programs. These funds will improve the quality and consistency of meals served to kids and make it easier for school districts to operate successful meal programs. And we are utilizing the other $500 million to increase the amount of local and regional foods going into schools. We're firmly committed to going the extra mile to ensure that people in more isolated areas of the country, communities of color, and families with children can easily access, participate, and prosper from our services. To accomplish our mission of truly achieving nutrition security, no community or family can be left behind. In closing, I believe USDA is off to a strong start. However, I wholeheartedly understand that we have a lot more work to do. I'll be the first to admit that to ensure all the work we are doing in equity truly sticks, we must hold ourselves accountable to building back a better USDA. As a former state commissioner of agriculture and a farm service agency state executive director who frequently met with the very stakeholders that we are trying to reach, this is personal for me. I've been to their farms. I've visited these families. I have listened to these stories, and I have heard these frustrations and these cries. And while we understand we can't fix the past mistakes overnight, both Secretary Vilsack and I are committed to learning from these mistakes and doing the intentional work of building trust in these communities that need us most, especially those that we have historically left behind. For your part, please know that when we talk about the communities and stakeholders we serve at USDA, we're not just talking about our nation's farmers and ranchers in rural America. It touches you too. USDA may very well be part of the foundation of the places that all of you call home. Our programs have the power to reach every individual family and community across the nation, from the sustainable care of our nation's natural resources, to the safe and healthy food we eat, to the businesses and the banks that sustain us, to the hospitals that have cared for our families, to rural housing and the schools and libraries where our kids learn and eat nutritious meals, to building a more resilient food system and promoting the use of science, research, and climate-smart agricultural practices, all the way to supporting the water infrastructure of many local, state, and tribal governments. You see, if we are successful in creating a more equitable and inclusive USDA, it will not only benefit historically underserved producers and communities, it benefits all of us. So I ask for only two things. One, that you give us a chance, and two, that you continue to hold us accountable for doing what is right. USDA strives to institutionalize this emphasis on equity so that in time, we become known as a trusted partner that does right by underserved communities and lives up to its name as the People's Department, now and in the future. And so I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to future opportunities to work with you all. Thank you so much.
Dr. Bronner, Jewel Bronner. And Dr. Bronner, I can say both as the Secretary of HHS who spoke earlier and then now you, the two things you asked we will definitely do, hold you accountable, is what we do. And I think that you're laying that, what we want is facts. You know, the young folk today have an expression where they talk about facts. And that's why we wanted people to come and give us facts. So as we go in our sessions, we take the facts to say where we wanted to go. One of the things we did yesterday when we had the Black Economic panel, and you had the state controller and the city controller, is to say, well, let's measure every year how much more you invest with money managers from our community. Don't just get up and say we're going to do better. I want to know how we measure better. You don't go to the bank and say, I need more money. You go to the bank and fill out a number, and either you got that in your account or not. So National Action Network is about being specific. That's why I wanted to hear what she said specifically on the USDA, because you don't eat in general, you eat in specific. All right. One of the areas that we are extremely concerned about, and it also is an area that I think people act as though it has nothing to do with civil rights. It has everything to do with civil rights, and that is housing. Part of the civil rights movement was housing discrimination. One of the things that came out of the civil rights movement in the 60s was the question of housing discrimination and affordable housing as we deal with the issues of gentrification and replacement, and all of these issues and remains of major concern. When this administration came in, behind the last administration, part of our meetings with Joe Biden was to raise these issues. One, you must remember, the former president was a developer who was all the way in the other side of these issues than us. He believed in making money off property and excluding people based on who they were. Do not forget that he faced a discrimination suit, him and his father, for keeping blacks out of their housing. So you know the kind of housing stuff we had. Then he appointed a housing secretary who had come out of our community, but that was anti many of those interests. One of the bright stars that we saw in the early part of this administration was that President Biden put over housing someone who was a champion, someone who we could trust, someone who led strongly, never bit a tongue, and we knew that we were getting ready to have some serious dealing because who he put over housing. And she didn't send someone, she came today herself. She is a ranking cabinet member. She is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development for the United States government, former Congresswoman from Ohio, Congresswoman Secretary Marsha Fudge.
Good morning. You got it. I am so happy to be here. I want you to know, Reverend, it's money in my bank account. And I intend to spend it all. All right. Thank you all so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. You know, the preamble of the Constitution starts with 17 words, and they are, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice." I'm honored to be here with Reverend Sharpton, who I know fights to ensure that we, the people, are included and that we establish justice. The members of the National Action Network understand that while we, the people, have come a long way, we have a long way to go. It is hard to be black in America, and people need to understand it. I want to thank you for all the work you do, to all the affiliates, and I'm sure is somebody from Ohio here? All right. Oh, I see y'all. Got to give a shout out to the home folk. But everybody understands the moment that we face, Reverend, and this is our moment. This is our moment, and we must not shrink from our moment. You know, I grew up around a lot of older people, although I've become one of them now, but I grew up around a lot of older people. And they used to say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. That is where we find ourselves today. I was not joking when I said it is still hard to be black in America. Many of us remain trapped in poverty. Too many of us live in crumbling homes and being poisoned by the paint on our walls and the water that comes from our pipes. Many of us live in neighborhoods that have been neglected for decades and decades. Our children are born behind the starting line of life, playing catch up from day one. This is no time for us to shrink. We must meet this moment because it is our moment. It is our moment. And we are not going to be denied equal protection under the law. I'm going to do my part. You know, when I accepted the role as the 18th Secretary of HUD, I knew that there was a great task before me. We faced a number of crises. We still redline. We still don't loan to black people and brown people and poor people. We still undervalue people's houses just because of the color of their skin. But I remember, Reverend, when Jesus said to his disciples, "To whom much is given, much is required." And I have been given much. I've always had a home. Now, mind you, it had a whole lot of people in it. We had a duplex, Reverend, and on one side it was my great-grandparents, my aunt and uncle, their 6 kids, and whoever came from the South to visit. On our side, it was my grandmother and my mother, and all of us, my brother, my cousins, and whoever came from the South to visit. But that's all I knew. And it was all right because I always had a safe place to call home. Always had one. And everything I loved was in that little house. And everybody should have that same feeling, to feel safe at home. So I believe that I am required, that I am obligated, that I am charged to help those who have been overlooked for far too long. It is part of the responsibility that I have to ensure that every person that wishes to buy a home in this country, especially people of color, have that opportunity. And for those who live in public housing, those who are in my care, can live safely and be treated with dignity every single day. It has been more than 50 years, Reverend, since the Fair Housing Act was passed, and you were just talking about that. But the gap between black and white home ownership is bigger today than it was in 1968. It absolutely is a shame. But under this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, we are tackling the root causes of discrimination in home ownership because we know, for us, owning a home is our greatest source of generational wealth. So last summer, the president appointed me to be the chair of a task force that examines racial bias in home appraisals. You've seen the stories of how our homes are devalued and undervalued just because we live in black communities. If we could just close that gap and not lose billions and billions of dollars every year because our properties are undervalued, we could make a big difference in this country. And I know for a fact, because I'm one of those people, I live in an all-black community. My house is 2 doors from an all-white community. My house is bigger. I got a bigger lot than the house 2 doors from me. My house is valued at $25,000 less. So just think that every 4 years I lose $100,000 in equity and wealth. Just think what happens when you multiply that all across this nation. It is billions and billions of dollars. But let me tell you what, it's getting ready to stop right now. See, some people you can't give some people power because they use it. And I'm using mine. I am not afraid to do what is right. And to the president's credit, he is excited about the work we are doing. We're going to make sure that that changes. We're also going to make sure that people have a real shot at buying a home. So we know that most people of color, when they come to buy a home, One of the biggest impediments is student loans. You know, our parents don't always have the kind of money to send us to school, and we have no debt. So what we've done, because we knew it was a problem, we've now neutralized student debt. If you get an FHA insured loan, we're gonna make sure you get it. That's what happens when you put the right people in the right places. I got a team of people. Y'all stand up so they can see y'all. Just stand up and wave at the people. These people know what they are doing. We also, Reverend, are coming up with a new product where we can assist people by, instead of having a 30-year mortgage when they get in trouble, we're going to refinance those mortgages and make that mortgage now 40 years. So that we can reduce your payments, reduce your interest rate. Yes, it'll take you longer, but you'll still have your house. We are asking in this budget, the president's budget for 23 is asking for down payment assistance. We know most people of color can pay their rents. It's the down payment that creates a problem. So we are now trying to do down payment assistance so that we can get people in homes, and then we're going to put the down payment on the back end of the mortgage. We have told banks that it's okay to do special things for people who have historically been underserved. Because see, they kept saying it was discriminatory. No, it's not discriminatory. And so we are saying to you, you can do that. We're going to make sure we have oversight of fair lending. When people come to us and say that they've been discriminated against, we have a hotline on our website. If you think you've been discriminated against, then you need to call us, because we're going to look into it. Homelessness, I have to address homelessness, just for a minute. On any given night, more than 500,000 people sleep on the streets of this country, on any given night. Wow. Black people make up 13% of the population of this country, but we are 40% of all the people who sleep on the streets, 40%. And the fastest growing groups of homeless people are senior citizens and families with children, and we have to do something about it. So I just want you to know that these are things that we're working on. Now, I'm going to tell you, we can't change everything, but we're going to change a lot. We're going to change a lot. We're going to make sure that everybody gets a fair shot. Because the one thing I know is I did not get to this dance by myself. A whole lot of people helped me to get here. I stand on a lot of people's shoulders. You know, the old folks used to say, we all drink from wells we did not dig. And so I am glad to be able to drink from the wells of people like a Shirley Chisholm that was from here. You know, Shirley Chisholm is famous for saying, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. So now that we've got that folding chair pulled up to the table, now what we need to do is make room for somebody else. It's just like, because I'm from a big family, we have big dinners. And we always make room. We just scoot over and let somebody pull up a chair. That's what we need to do as black people right now, is make room. We need to hear all of the voices and let everybody who wants to say something say something. Because if we don't, we will fail the next generation. And I'm just saying to you, Reverend, I know you're younger than me, but I am getting to an age where it is time for me to turn my work to somebody else. And I want them to be prepared. I don't want them stepped up in here and know nothing. So I have taken on the responsibility of helping to prepare them. You know, Fannie Lou Helmer told us that we all sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so what we have to do is form the kind of coalitions that can stand in the moment. I'm going to close by saying these couple of things. Anybody that underestimates black people is making a huge mistake. We are a determined people who have been through a lot, and we are still standing. And so this is our moment. And that means, Reverend, I know that everybody here votes, but that means getting some other people to do the same thing. That means lifting your voice for the right thing. That means saying to your neighbor or your community, things must change. But it is up to us. We have to decide if we want two nations, one black, one white, one rich, one poor. This is one America. We stand up and say, one nation under God. Let's show what one nation under God looks like. And so, Reverend, I know that you and Nan are going to do their part, but I just want to say, as I close, Langston Hughes writes, I too sing America, land that I love. I too sing America. I am an American, and nobody is going to take that away from me. Thank you all. That's for you, honey.
Oh, thank you. Good to see you. Marcia Fudge, Secretary of Housing. Secretary of HUD, Marcia Fudge. Wow, that was a powerful message from Secretary. Secretary Fudge really laid it on. I want our housing committees and our chapters, I hope you all were taking notes in her statement. I see the chairman of our board, Dr. W. Franklin Richardson, come on up to the dais. We had our national board meeting this morning. We're moving right along. We are on time. Let us now hear from the congressman from Newark, New Jersey, Congressman Donald Payne from New Jersey.
Good morning. Nan, it's good to be here. Let me say that it took me a little while to get across the river, but I'm here. And it is really an honor to be here for the National Action Network's convention to celebrate its 30th year, its 30th anniversary. That's a beautiful thing, beautiful thing. And I saw somebody out in the hallway, and he said, "Oh, Congressman Payne, I heard you're going to be here, so I had to be here to hear you speak." I was like, "Really?" They said, "Oh yeah, no, I heard you speak last week, and you were amazing." Now I'm starting to kind of feel a little good about myself. I said, "Oh really?" She said, "Yes, sir." I said, "What'd I speak about?" She said, "I don't know, but you were brief." So in that vein, I'll be brief. And the sister that you just had lead the stage, before she took her position at HUD, I had dinner with 4 nights a week in Washington as Congressional Black Caucus members kind of stick together. And normally Cedric Richmond, who is in the White House now, Jim Clyburn, Benny Thompson from Mississippi, and Miss Fudge and myself had dinner about 3 or 4 nights a week. So I was the pup of the group. I was the mascot. You know, I just sit there and listen and learn. But it was really good to see her. We don't get to see each other much now to see she's in the executive branch. So, but she's doing an outstanding job. And let me tell you, she speaks truth to power. She's not laying a bunch of lines on you. She means that thing. She means what she says, and you will see the difference in the Biden administration with results at HUD. But I want to thank Reverend Sharpton and his staff for the invitation to speak to you today. So this year's theme of the convention is Action to Restore Justice and True Democracy. And that theme has never been more relevant than today in the African American community. The forces of racism and prejudice have found a new voice and a new power these days. And they're trying to undo the advances that we have made to create an equal society. But they will fail. They will fail. Because the resolve in our community is stronger than ever, and we are not going back to the good old days, because I don't know who they were good for, but I don't know if they were good for anybody in this room. So we can't go back. Right now, there's a battle to secure voting rights for every citizen in the country. There are still people who think all Americans do not deserve to vote. And they target our African American communities directly because they see how elections turn out when we vote. And let's put it out there. I'm going to put it out there. I know that black women have been and made the difference if Trump was reelected or not. Black women did that. That's right. And it makes me furious, absolutely furious, that we have to go through this cycle every 15 or 20 years to keep our right to vote. Why is that? Because they knew one day they would try to turn back the clock. So every 10 or 15 years, the Congress gets together and decides whether black people should vote. That should have been a right. Once it was given, it was permanent as first-class citizens in this country. Every 15 years or so, we're going to decide whether, well, let's see, should they? All right, we'll do it again. No. The next time we do this, we have to try to make sure that it's permanent. That's why I helped pass the Freedom to Vote, the John R. Lewis Act. It would make Election Day a national holiday. And just think of how many people that would help that have trouble voting because they have to get to work, or if the line is long in the morning, they have to go on to work, or then when they get off, they're a little tired and don't go. If it was a national holiday, you can get up and go anytime you want it. But that would make too much sense. That would help too many people vote. It would make voting more accessible for all Americans. And it ends the partisan cutting up of congressional districts. In Florida, that governor down there is about to wipe out 3 of my colleagues, and only one of them is going to be in a district to run a race. But they are wiping out the 3 black districts in Florida and cutting them up to make sure an African American can't win. We've got to stop that. We've got to stop that. Even my district has become more white. I had the most African American majority district in the state of New Jersey, and somehow I ended up with them taking people away from me, but it didn't impact me to the point of my Florida colleagues. But we have to be careful and mindful of this going on all around the country, Ohio and everywhere. And it dilutes our power. It dilutes our power. Even more important, states with a history of voter discrimination under the John Lewis Act would need federal approval before they could change their voting laws. And we've got to get that put back in the law. There's never been more important time to pass this bill than right now. I'm fighting to secure the right to vote for all Americans, and especially African Americans. And I'm not apologetic, yes, for African Americans. Now, sometimes they want to, pull you down. Oh, you're just picking out African Americans. What about all the Americans? Well, you pick them out every day. So I'm here to defend them every day. But it's not just our votes that we need to protect in this country. It's our lives. That's why I was proud to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to eliminate police brutality. One of the most important votes I've taken since being in the Congress. It bans chokeholds, George Floyd, and no-knock warrants, Breonna Taylor. And it creates more accountability when police officers use lethal force, Derek Chauvin. It sets up an independent reviews of incidents when police use force, and it creates a database of those incidents. That way, police officers like Derek Chauvin are pulled out of the force before they murder Americans. And what happens is a guy, he messes up in a town over there, he goes 3 towns over and gets rehired. So because there's nowhere for them to check to see what their record is. Now, you try to go somewhere and do something, and they know everything. They know your mama, your daddy, who you live next to. But a police officer, we don't know what his past record was? Nah, that doesn't make sense. So, it's a bill that's long overdue to address the racial disparities that exist in law enforcement. Another bill I support is H.R. 40, to conduct a study of the feasibility of slavery reparations. Long overdue. Long overdue. Can you imagine what that 40 acres and a mule would be worth today? We'd all not need to work. This bill will allow an extensive study to answer the question about reparations. In addition, I was proud to help pass the law to declare Juneteenth, the end of slavery, a national holiday. Healthcare and health disparities is another issue where African Americans face great disparities in treatment. Today, minorities do not get the same quality health care as white Americans, and it causes African Americans to die more frequently from curable diseases. In fact, 1 out of every 5 African American deaths could have been prevented if they received the same level of health care as white members of this country. In Congress, we introduced the Health Equity and Accountability Act to address this issue. It would invest in solutions to make sure all Americans had access to quality care and diversify our country's medical workforce to improve the care in marginalized communities. I'm working diligently to improve health disparities and several medical issues such as colorectal cancer, which is pervasive in our community. It's the 2nd highest cause of cancer deaths and the 4th highest cause of new cancer nationwide, and it's the 2nd most curable cancer that there is. So that doesn't make sense. It's the 2nd highest killer of people in the country, and it's one of the most curable cancers that you can have. That's just a matter of finding it early enough and detecting it. And African Americans are more likely to be diagnosed with colorectal cancer and die from it. It's what my father died from. I was a councilman in the city of Newark in 2012, and my father succumbed to colorectal cancer, and I followed him into Congress. I tell people it's probably the worst way to ever go to Congress is to lose your parent. But I have made it my fight in the African American community. And so in the 116th Congress, my Removing Barriers to Colorectal Cancer Screening Act was signed into law. And it allowed Medicare to cover procedures to remove cancerous growths or polyps during the colorectal examination. What was happening is, and some of you might notice, you went for the colonoscopy, and if they found a polyp or a cancerous sore, they removed it. But you woke up and you had a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 bill because they removed the polyps. Well, this bill that I created says if and when they do find that it's included in that service, and there's no bill when you wake up. And so it's helped people save thousands and thousands of dollars, and I'm very, very proud of that. And so in addition, I introduced the Colorectal Cancer Payments Fairness Act to provide this new coverage by the end of the year. And so not only did I pass a law that they can't do it, I'm making sure that the money is there so it goes through. You know, a lot of times that's the disconnect. We can write a law, but they don't enforce it and they don't put the money behind it. Well, I followed it up to make sure the money follows the bill. So another area, health disparities, is limb amputations. And these are all things that I'm working on in Congress. And it's something that a lot of people have picked up on, but I'm a diabetic. And ladies and gentlemen, I've been through it. I've got congenital heart failure. I've got a boot on right now that is because of a diabetic ulcer. I've lost my eyesight. So I've gone through all of those issues that diabetics have. But it's allowed me to articulate in the Congress what is needed for our community in order that other people don't end up like me. And I have good health care, so I've been fortunate. I really believe had I not gone to Congress at the time I did, I possibly could be dead right now. But the health care that I received is so good that I'm here standing before you. But every American should have what I have. And that's what I fight for. There's nothing special about me that I should have something that you don't. In this country, in the greatness of this country, and it's great, but it just doesn't work for everybody. And that's what we gotta fight. It's great. Don't ever not say it's not great, but you can say it doesn't work for me like it works for other people. And that's what we're fighting. So I'm gonna continue to do work on those issues around, I could have potentially, with this ulcer, lose my foot. So, I'm just been very fortunate. So I'm not going to keep you much longer, but, I just wanted to let you know a few of the things that we're working on in Congress and to let you know that we've got them on the run, and we're not going to let up. The Congressional Black Caucus is fighting every single day. And I know sometimes you don't get the message, but you gotta read and you gotta see, because the information is there. And they kind of try to keep a lid on us too. They don't report everything that we do. I have problems in my district. All these things I just mentioned to you, a lot of people don't know what I'm doing because the media won't cover it, because you're doing something that they may not want you to get done. But that doesn't mean we ain't going to continue to fight. So let me just say that I'm also working on issues around people that don't have bank accounts or don't have Apple Pay and all that. They're trying to get rid of the dollar bill in this country. That's why you got the swiping for your groceries, ATM at the bank, going through the toll pass. They're trying to get rid of people's jobs and the dollar too. So Starbucks won't even take cash anymore. And there's a move afoot in this country to do that. Now, who do you think that's going to impact? Once again, people that look like us, people that are poor, people that don't have bank accounts. There are 55 million people in this country that are underbanked or unbanked. And so I'm fighting that fight too. My fights aren't that glamorous, but I know what it's going to do for the impact of people in their everyday lives. And that's what I go to Congress every single day. You know, I ain't going to get up here and blow you away with my oratory skills, but I do the work every single day. And I want you to know that. Thank you. God bless you, Nan. And let's keep pushing forward.
Congressman Donald Payne of Newark. Congressman Donald Payne, come on. Let me bring up, we're going to have our media panel, and where is Rachel Nordlinger? Rachel has, in her own imitable style, put together a star panel that only Rachel could put together. And y'all clapped for Rachel last night. Don't clap every day. And one of the things I learned let me say on the panel today, we have a stellar panel on media. Messaging, one of the first things that you do in a revolution is take over the media, because you won't know there's a new government if they don't take over media. And messaging is important. You know, some of the people that have been critical of me in my career said that Rev Mal just gets a lot of publicity. That's exactly what I try to do. Because if we don't publicize something, it will not be an issue. Any activist here, from whatever chapter you're at, if you do not know how to publicize what you're doing, then you are not a good activist. That is malpractice. We have some of the best in media. Let me just recognize them, and then I want to bring in our plenary speaker. We have from Politico, a young brother who's really made his mark, Eugene Daniels. Director of 94.7 The Block NYC, and we've known him for years, Brother Skip Dillard. From the publisher of The Source, and he has been a real part of National Action Network from the beginning. He is our real brother. He now owns The Source, but he's been in media. He was the brain behind Prince as well as Michael Jackson, and he is a dynamo in his own right, but now owns The Source. Londell McMillan. From Associated Press, Aaron Morrison. My friend and brother from Brooklyn, who has, I've known him since the Daily News. We've gotten to know each other better when he started doing commentary on MSNBC. Now he is the host of Way Too Early. And that is way too early for y'all. I work out at that time. It's breakfast time for me. It's way too early for y'all. Brother Jonathan Lemire. And the one and only host of In Focus. She's an author. She's here every year, and we love her. You hear they start chanting her name already, Cheryl Will. And of course, the host of the panel, we couldn't get a better host. He is, in his own right, earned the respect and regard of the community. I knew him when he was a young man in Brooklyn trying to get in some business stuff done. And his partner got rich and he went to broadcast, so he's just had to make it best way he can. Now he is the emperor of New York politics, gone national. Many see him do his national work on CNN, though nobody watches CNN since we on MSNBC. But sometime when Dateline is on, we might switch over. Brother Errol Lewis. All right. Rachel said to me, who could set the tone? Who could give the perspective on how we are dealing with media at this era and this time? And the person that immediately came to mind to me that we called, and he agreed to come. He was going to be out of the country, and then he called back and said, I'll do it for Nan. He's been here before in the panel, but we wanted him to be the plenary speaker before the panel starts. And he is someone that I believe in. I've met a lot of people in my journey that pose to be progressive, pose to be woke. But he was woke before it became a slogan and was progressive before it was in vogue. And he comes from that. His father was progressive. And he is sincere. And that is what is most important to me. You know, I've met a lot of folk, big and small, famous and unknown. And I know the difference between a phony and someone real. Including, y'all know, I know some right in this room that's both. He is the real deal. Y'all know him and watch him and celebrate him. And he thought it not robbery to be here today, to be the plenary speaker, setting the tone. The host of All In with Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes.
Thank you, Rev. Now, the ones of you that didn't stand, those are the phonies, right? Is that how we're going to figure this out? Who's who? I'm just scratching my head the whole time trying to figure out who's who. I think the Rev has the list. This is what I look like without professional hair and makeup. I hope you're not too disappointed. We were doing our own during the pandemic. It was rough. It's wonderful to be here with all these wonderful people, this esteemed panel. Thank you to the Rev, thank you to Nan, thank you to you for being here. Thank you to the legendary Rachel for inviting me. I was possibly going to be in Ukraine this week, which is why I told Rachel first, but I'm here instead. And I think I would give a little sketch of where things stand, I think, in the media, and it jumps off of something the Rev said. Throughout his career in public life, as the Rev said, he has gotten acclaim and criticism for his singular ability to draw attention. I think we could agree, right? Okay. Attention, I have come to believe, is the single most important resource of the 21st century.
That's true.
That attention is prior to everything else: persuasion, mobilization, change. Attention is the first thing. And I want to give an example of that we're seeing right now in Ukraine. What does Russia have? Russia has an enormous army, much bigger than the Ukrainian army. Russia has some of the largest fossil fuel exports in the entire world. Natural gas they sell to Europe, oil they sell around the world. Russia is a much larger country than Ukraine. It has many more individuals, men under arms than Ukraine. What does Ukraine have right now? They have will.
They have will and determination. They have the world's attention. They have the world's attention. Now, they didn't have the world's attention for the last 8 years when a shooting war was happening in that same country by those same forces that has killed 10,000 people in the eastern provinces of Ukraine, in what's called the Donbass. I mean, we didn't cover it that much. Everyone in this room woke up every day. That was just a thing that was happening in the world, like a lot of things that are happening in the world. But the invasion changed things. And suddenly, we had an interesting situation. Russia, a traditional authoritarian petrostate run by an ex-KGB intelligence officer. Okay? So you're betting on who's going to win this, right? An ex-intelligence KGB officer, many more individuals under arms. Versus a country that is run by a comedian. A comedian with a camera. So what does a comedian learn how to do over the course of their life? Get attention. Funny thing, you may or may not know this. The show that, the big hit show that Volodymyr Zelensky was in, it's a very funny show. You can actually watch it on Netflix, and I have watched it, and you know what? It's funny. It's a good show. Subtitles. Volodymyr Zelensky had a show called Servant of the People. Servant of the People is a story about a somewhat hapless high school student who still lives with his parents and goes on a rant against corruption in Ukraine that is caught on video camera, that is then posted to YouTube and goes so viral, he is propelled into the presidency. That's the comedy he starred in that then led him to being propelled to the presidency. And so, as fate would have it, the person running Ukraine at the moment it faced an existential threat to its well-being from the weapons and the army of Russia was a man who had spent his life developing one thing, which was the ability to capture attention. So what do I mean by attention as a resource? It's almost like a currency. It could be spent. It could be traded. Zelensky realized from the first moment that having the world's attention would be the necessary precondition to Ukraine's resistance to Russian aggression because, of course, they were outmanned and outgunned. Those videos of him walking through the streets of Kyiv, those cell phone videos where he refuses to leave, the addresses to the Bundestag and to the UN and to the American Congress, at every step of the way, he has kept the world's attention, and that attention has been converted into the most restrictive sanction regime basically ever. A ban on U.S. imports of oil. Lithuania has recently joined that as well. Military shipments of Stinger anti-tank, of Stinger anti-aircraft, of Javelin anti-tank arms, of drones, of money. All of that flows from the ability of the Ukrainian people to capture attention. But here's the thing too. That's the good news for Ukraine, right? The bad news is that like a resource, like the gasoline in a tank that you burn through, attention gets burned up.
That's right.
The Rev knows.
That's right.
Gets burned up. It's like the logs on a fire. You got to keep putting more logs on.
That's right.
Zelensky knows that too. You can feel the desperation in him. Because he knows the moment the world's attention goes away, they're in tough shape.
That's right.
So
He's got to keep adding more logs.
Right.
That's the trick of it, right? I think this relates to something that we saw happen in this country in 2020. That's right, George Floyd.
Right.
Police in this country, well, America is a very violent place. We know that, right? It's a very violent place.
yes, sir.
Always has been. Most violent place, if you look at the OECD countries, if you look at the cohort of American countries, the cohort of developed, rich democracies, we are the most violent by far. by far. And always have been. We have more people killing each other. We have more police killing people. We have more people in prison than any rich democracy in the world. Some of that violence gets attention and some doesn't. Why? You know, this is the most often, the most asked question I get as a journalist, and it's the one that I have the hardest time answering. It's this: why'd you cover this and not that? Why'd you cover this and not that? I don't know, man. This was news, that wasn't. It's amazing. When you press journalists on this question, it's a remarkably under-theorized answer. They'll hem and haw, they'll say, well, that was news. Well, what's news? Well, what we cover. Well, why'd you cover it? It was news. It's true. It's a thing you sense. George Floyd was killed, murdered on camera, and it was shocking. There was a reason that got coverage. The same way there's a reason the Russian invasion of Ukraine got coverage, right? It's a shocking act. It's worthy of coverage. That coverage happened, and the world's attention was on George Floyd. The world's attention was on the U.S. system of policing and criminal justice. The nation's attention was on hundreds of years of racial hierarchy and racial oppression and enduring forms of segregation. They were the largest civil rights protests by number in terms of people out on the street in the country's history. Right? And that fire burned hot. And then it burned out.
That's right.
And the attention went elsewhere. Because you can only sustain attention for so long. So what does that add up to for change? What does it mean for a cause or a struggle to gain attention and lose it, and what comes afterwards? And I'm not an activist, I'm not a practitioner, I'm a journalist, and, you know, I'm just a guy who looks into a camera and says what he thinks. Usually my hair looks better than this, but that's my job. And I think what I've come to see, and I think the Rev would say the same, is attention is necessary for change but not sufficient.
That's right.
There has to be a structure in place.
Right.
Networks of affiliation, institutions, organization, mobilization that are there to take advantage of the moments when that flame burns hot.
Yes, sir. 100%.
Because it's going to wax and wane. So the institutions have to be there in order for change to take place for when the attention comes back if it goes away. And on the flip side, all of us on this dais, we have to think hard and introspect to come up with some reasons about why we pay attention to some things and not others. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be called out a lot about it. People, I mean, believe me, people have complaints about the media. They share them with me on the street. When I'm walking my dog. Or taking my kids to the Little League. Why'd you cover this and not that? I got it. I'm just standing there with a little doggy bag. It's a tough position to argue with someone, you know? But they're right. I mean, I'm not inviting you to do this, but they're right. Those are really important questions to ask, because the more that we recognize on both sides of this equation, the people like us who are partly responsible for directing attention, and the people who consume media, to the degree we understand together how vital and important that resource is, the more deeply we can think about what we're doing with that resource, how we're using it, whether we're directing it in the places that it belongs. Because there's another guy who's pretty good at getting attention, who was President of the United States for 4 years. And I think people in this room, well, yes, but I think people in this room probably think there's a relationship between his ability to do that and to become president. That ability could be wielded for good or for ill. And the further we get into the attention age, the further we get into this era in which this resource powers so much of our lives, the harder all of us are going to have to think about the rules for using that resource, for mining that resource, and for deploying it. And I hope everyone here in the room continues to keep us honest on that front, and I know you will. All right, I don't want to keep you too long from this great panel because all these people are looking at me and they have things to say too. But I do want to say that that engagement, your engagement with the news, your engagement with us, really matters a lot. And as much as no one likes to get criticized and people tweeting at me, the back and forth is a vital part of building a democratic culture that's responsive. And so I want to thank all of you for coming this morning. Thank you for listening to that little spiel. I hope I gave you something to think about, and I'll happily be back in this room, hopefully next year. Thank you very much.
Chris Hayes. Thank you, everybody. Let me say this as Chris gets ready to leave. What he said, I want you to take to heart. Chris, that was an excellent statement, especially for this organization, because I was saying at the Trayvon Martin anniversary, 10 years this year, that 10 years ago, when we were doing the Trayvon Martin movement, there was a group of young activists. Then there was another group at the Michael Brown in Ferguson. Then there was another group. And people in our youth department started saying, why are they always different groups of activists? Because some knew how to get attention and never built. Right. And that's what by growing up under Reverend Jackson and others, I knew to build an organization,
Yes, sir.
which is what y'all are, that had to last between. That's why we got an Eric Garner law here in New York, because it fell to an organization. And that's what we tried to get the George Floyd bill through while we had that attention. And the attention petered and people didn't get it, and we've got to wait on the next wave, but we'll get it. But if you're not organized, you won't be around for the next wave. So Chris is absolutely right, and I thank him for his statement. Now let me turn it over, who's going to be the pastor of this congregation for the next hour, Bishop Errol Lewis.
Praise the Lord, Bishop.
Thank you, Rev. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm very glad to see everybody. Folks looking happy and healthy. I've run into folks that I haven't seen in a couple of years now because we've been kept away from each other. So it's very good to see everybody here in person. And a number of the panelists who I'm meeting for the first time and others who I have not seen in person either in quite a while. So this is a happy morning in some respects. We have some serious business to talk about. I will say up front, just so everybody knows this, many of the people up here as working journalists are going to be anxiously checking their watches and their clocks because the confirmation vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson is coming up.
Wow.
And some of us, I'll put myself in this category, are expected to be at work when that happens. So, all of which is to say, we're going to be brief. We're going to tell you what we came to say, and we're going to surface some ideas, put some thoughts and perspectives out there on the table, and then we're going to all run off. Some of y'all will celebrate, some of us will work, and we'll have a great afternoon today. You've heard the introductions of the panelists, so I'm going to just jump right in and ask each of them to weigh in the 2 to 3 minute range, folks, thanks, on the media coverage of cases, the killings of Ahmaud Arbery. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and the protests in reaction to them. What kind of a job collectively have we done, do you think, in making sure that those stories were told properly, with proper context, with the right backstory and narrative, so that people could fully understand their importance? And how can we do a better job? Let me start with you, Jonathan.
Thank you all, first of all, for being here. And I think that...
Make sure it's on.
Is it on? Oh, there you go. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the assist there. I think that it is a work in progress. I think that what we saw over the last couple of years is obviously a difficult moment for much of this country. And I think that the media coverage should always strive to be better, to be more inclusive, to have better representation of people inside and outside of the newsroom. I think that we have all learned. There's no question, to echo what Chris said a few moments ago, that it's about attention. It shouldn't require a shocking piece of cell phone video to get the nation's attention to something that happens entirely too often, to something that causes such pain for not just a family, but for a community, for a country. But that is where we are. TV needs images sometimes. You know, that's a way for story to get out. Social media, for all of its ills, and there are many, does also have a way of unearthing things that happen, things that would have been missed otherwise. So that is a good. But it is important, extremely important, for the media to provide the appropriate context, particularly when there are some bad faith actors out there. Members of the media, members of a political party, elected officials who want to distort, who want to make sure the truth does not come out or shape it in the way they want to see it. And sometimes that's deliberate, sometimes not, often deliberate. And therefore, I think it's the media's job is to be as direct and as clear as we can. And you know, I've worked at the Associated Press, I work at Politico, at MSNBC, and none of these organizations are perfect. Other major ones, not either, whether it is CNN or New York One or the New York Times, the Washington Post. We all have our flaws. But our job is to do the best we can to tell you what happened and to provide the necessary context with it. So I think that, was our coverage perfect? Absolutely not. Was it better than it would have been 10, 15 years ago? Probably, but we have a long way to go. I think that would be fine.
Okay. Let me bring my colleague Cheryl Wills into the conversation. Hello. One thing that comes up when we're talking about the coverage of these things is we have the kind of channel where we have what's called a wheel, where we run the same headlines pretty much each hour, and we're doing traffic and weather and so forth, and showing repeated loops of violence committed in what looks like an unjust and unacceptable way. There was some pushback from some people, and even some discussion within the newsroom. What are we doing? Are we furthering a feeling and a mood? Are we re-traumatizing people? Are we putting out stuff that's so powerful that people turn off from it? What do you think of that?
Yeah, that is, of course, a question, Errol, that we deal with, especially because we're 24/7. But we do have to be careful because, for example, Eric Garner's mom could watch the murder of her child. This is a mother, right, who could watch the murder of her child over and over. So we absolutely have decided as a news organization to be sensitive to the loop of that video, and very often we will use stills, like a still photo, out of respect, because it is respect. These are not objects. These are sons, uncles, daughters that we have to be mindful of. But to answer your question also, Errol, I want to use a little historical perspective to 1955 when Emmett Till was murdered, and mostly the black press covered that murder. It was largely ignored by the mainstream. And Mamie Till lit up everyone, and she was a trailblazer in that respect, letting the world know my son's life mattered. And she told the world, and the press was like, what are you saying? We're not supposed to care. And she made them care. Fast forward to George Floyd, when both you and I were on the air together talking about this. We've come a long way because I'm going to speak for myself. I felt comfortable expressing my rage. I was tired of being this impartial, police say, this says no. I'm mad as hell because I have a son that looks just like George Floyd, who could also be targeted. And I expressed that, and that could not have happened, Errol, without all of the journalists who opened the doors for us. So as an African-American journalist, we've come a long way when a sister could sit on television and say enough is enough. I've had enough of this.
All right.
I mean that.
Aaron Morrison at the Associated Press, which is a global organization. Associated Press, for those who don't know, was started by other news organizations, and they capture a whole lot of news that finds its way into all kinds of different platforms and newspapers all around the country and indeed around the world. What's your perspective on the coverage both of these cases and what became sort of a worldwide explosion of protest in reaction to them?
Right. I think one of the things that, the mistake that the media often makes in covering these things is to make it seem as though those of us who rise up, that we don't actually care about our communities because there's something on fire or something's being looted. But the reality is, how else are you going to hear that we're angry? And how can the media do a better job or a good job, really, of properly contextualizing those images? If you see it over and over and over again, you could watch CNN, MSNBC, or any of the other news channels and think the whole city was on fire. But it's not. We really have to be careful what, as journalists, what we put out there and how we contextualize it. And I think that was something that was done well by some in 2020 during the protests, and not done so well by others. And so, one of the things I would love to actually mention, especially what Chris Hayes said about this being a violent country. We talk about violence in a very limited way, and I think we have to expand what we think or mean by violence. There can be economic violence. The student loan debt crisis is economic violence, especially to the black community. There's environmental violence that takes place in our communities. The Flint water crisis is one example of that. There's policy violence when something that should be passed isn't passed. And there's disinvestment in our communities. When our roads are not fixed, when our schools are falling apart, when our water systems are not up to snuff, that is also violent. So I think when we talk about the movement, we talk about this racial reckoning that we saw, in 2020. Let's expand what we mean by violence, and as journalists, let's cover all of those aspects of violence that we see.
Eugene Daniels, the reckoning, the enormous amount of attention that was suddenly paid to the cases like George Floyd really burst, just as Aaron was suggesting, into a lot of other different fields, including legislation, right? I mean, there's a lot of policy, a lot of electoral outcomes, a lot of follow-up. What kind of a job did we do you think, collectively, in really sort of making sure that didn't get lost in the process?
The thing that, when I think about what happened to George Floyd, it was, I watched just... There we go. Can you hear me? There we go. When I continuously had to cover, I was a video reporter at the time, so I continuously had to watch and cut video of what happened to George Floyd and his murder. And I had what I know now was my first and thankfully last panic attack. I sweat through my clothes. I was crying. My now fiance couldn't figure out how to calm me down. He called my mother, which is when you're a black son, the mom is the only one that can get you to calm down. And so she was able to calm me down. And I did a tweet thread that was because I kept having people in D.C. asking me, I don't understand this. How can things like this happen? And does this happen to you? You're in Washington, D.C. You're a political reporter. This could never happen to you. And my hope was to explain to people, as a black man, not as a reporter, as anything like that, how this is scary for all of us. How I myself, walking in Washington, D.C., have been stopped by cops in my neighborhood asking me, what am I doing here? I'm like, what are you doing here? I live here. I don't know what you're doing. And so when we looked at trying to cover those things, and especially the legislation that came out, I think that in DC and DC politics, sometimes we focus too much on the sausage making, right? And cover a lot of things as a horse race. And we forget often that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was about the first part of that, the George Floyd part, right? How important it was that these kinds of things don't happen anymore in this country. I think the evolution of how we've covered things has happened, right? Politico did not have kind of an infrastructure at the time to really cover something like this. Our job was to cover power. Politico was founded to cover power and who has it. And so we looked at it, and I think a lot of organizations did is, not just covering the powerful, but who wants power? What does that mean for policy and politics in this country? What does that look like? And I think that evolution has happened, and that has also led into the evolution of people covering legislation a little bit more. I'm lucky, and Jonathan and I are lucky to work at a place that also has a whole host of people, hundreds of reporters who just cover policy, who cover the ins and outs of things that are moving up and down Capitol Hill. And so there is no George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, right? And we followed that the entire time. A lot of reporters did. And what we haven't followed since is, are there more conversations, right? And so that's where we need to do a better job, is after something fails to get turned into actual law, what happened and why? And we still don't fully, we still haven't fully done that. So I think, as always, journalists can and should try to do more and do better, because we're not perfect, we're human. And I think there are so many pushes and pulls, especially nowadays. You talk about attention. Sometimes when you're writing a story, you want to work on a story, you have to explain to your editor why you think people are going to read it, right? Because if people aren't reading it, we can't get paid. And that is an important aspect of it. So making sure, talking to folks like you who are really changing things, right? Who are really out on the streets, turning the cries of frustration and rage into making your elected leaders turn that into legislation. That's a story that I think we've done an okay job at doing, and that needs to continue.
Mm-hmm. Londell McMillan, and to be followed by Skip. I'd like to get your perspective on the cultural side. A lot of us are immersed in the day-to-day political coverage, and that was the lens through which we saw and reported on this reckoning, this racial justice reckoning, and the killings that preceded it. What was the conversation like in the hip-hop community?
Well, first, thank everybody for being here. Thank National Action Network, Al Sharpton, Reverend Jackson, I see you here. I see the daughter of Malcolm X here. I just had to say that. I'm sorry for going out of school. Malak Shabazz, I see her here. Culturally, we as a people, we dictate culture in America. Black people, Afro-Latino people, people of color and heritage. We create culture. So culturally, in the hip-hop world, it was outrage. And if anyone knows anything about hip-hop will be 50 years old in 2023 next year. A lot of people don't know that. Started down in my brother's Boogie Down Bronx, Ruben Diaz. And culturally, hip-hop has always been about storytelling beyond the beat. Unfortunately, it kind of lost its way, but culturally, you had so many influencers from not just hip-hop culture, from a black culture, keeping this issue live in the front. But what I wanted to say is that as an owner of media properties, that is absolutely key, not just as covering it, not just covering the story, but covering our people, not just telling the story, right, but also actually dictating and programming a campaign that's going to empower our people. And the #1 journalist in this whole movement was Darnella Frazier, that young girl with that camera.
Amen.
She was the #1 journalist that culturally said, I'm not going to allow this to happen. And she was the owner of her camera. She was the owner of that content. And it wasn't traditional media, print, television, or radio. It was social media that she uploaded it and programmed it because she had the access and distribution to her page. So I understand culturally it was a major issue because that sister caught something that we knew happened every single day, but traditional media wouldn't show it, or they didn't have their cameras in position. She was in position. And the whole thing about the attention issue, and I'm glad Chris Hayes spoke to it, because I was about to light him up, but he caught himself. Because he talked about attention as being powerful, which it is. Rev is way more than just an attention seeker. Our movement doesn't last on just attention, even though it's important, very important. But attention without retention is a waste. And we can't have retention without institutional ownership and power. So that's what we have to go. That's why they say no justice, no peace, because they want to have a continual retention of activism so that we make it newsworthy for the journalists to pay attention on it every single day. And so let's keep putting attention, but build our institutions and ownership. We need you to support Black-owned businesses. Because Sister said, she said, I felt comfortable expressing my rage. Now, she could say that. Why? Because she's superlative journalist. She paid her dues. She's damn near an icon in our community, and she's at a station that cares about these issues. Yeah. But what about if we had more Black-owned media where all of them can feel comfortable? Because if they get fired, they can go down the street and get their job. So I'm here to talk about not just media and coverage, but I'm here to talk about building our own media and owning our institutions, because unless we do that, we are always going to be subjected to the editor and the publisher and the owner cutting out our stories.
That's right.
All right. Okay, Skip, take us home on this question, Skip.
Sure. I think you have to take a step back from George Floyd. In March of 2020, we went into a pandemic in which our leaders, our government that we pay taxes to, knew darn well that our communities were going to be devastated. We're going to be impacted. We're going to have deaths untold and unseen by other communities. And they let it happen. I remember I was programming WBLS at the time. I'm now with Odyssey here in New York. And I remember talking to one of my jocks right at the end of May when the devastation happened around the murder of George Floyd. And I said, you know, we have an administration in Washington that let us hang in COVID, and they're going to be quiet and say nothing, because they're more interested in getting reelected and making general America believe that there's no crisis really happening out here, and this is an isolated incident, and the 1 or 2 police officers will be disciplined or fired. Everything will be fine. So we had to count on the Black journalists you see on this panel. We had to count on Reverend Sharpton, who came on our stations to do a town hall. We had to stop the music because we realized it was up to us. We saw in March 2020, one of my mentors, I remember Lloyd Williams called me. I'm on the board of the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, and I'm looking to him for some uplift, and this is in late April, and he starts to cry on the phone because we had lost another one of our board members. So we knew, with the way our communities were left behind out with COVID, that it was not going to be anything different for George Floyd. So we had to take to the streets. And thankfully, it was our journalists, our videographers, our photographers that got out here, told the stories, got the information to us, even through social media. And for that, I think 2020 was one of the most pivotal years for journalism, and especially black journalism in American history. And we will write a book on this one day. Students will study it. But journalism in our schools, more important than ever. Everyone believes because of social media you don't need people to study journalism anymore. That could not be further from the truth. Investigative journalism saved so many lives and continues through the pandemic, through George Floyd, through the election of 2020. Journalism matters. Black journalism matters as much as it ever did.
That's right.
Actually, I want to take that opportunity, building on what Skip said, to make a plug for the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY at the City University of New York, where I've been teaching for about 10 years as an adjunct. Teach urban reporting, and those of you who have been here in past years, I've often brought the class here to this setting, in part because there's so many newsmakers here, thanks to Reverend Sharpton, but in part to give them a sense of how to cover a social movement and understand that it's not just about going to press conferences where there are elected officials. They're not with me here today because they're actually in Brooklyn Criminal Court, learning how to do court reporting. Seriously, any young people that you come across especially, but it's also a great place for people who want to make a career change. Think about if you're serious about journalism. It's an 18-month program, works very, very well. We've had a lot of success. Let me ask the panelists to move on to that other big question in the last couple of years, which of course was COVID. And we'll start with you, Aaron. The reality of the pandemic. At first, there were a number of us who I think focused on the fact that there were disproportionate outcomes as far as serious illness, hospitalization, and death, and that this virus was attacking black and brown communities with a special force. It got talked about a little bit, and it kind of fell off as a story, and more importantly, as a strategy to a certain extent. Why is that? The nature of the pandemic in that respect has not changed. How do we recover that narrative as part of this story?
Well, again, we have to expand what we think about. We can report on the racial disparity in infections and in death, but let's also talk about the impact of the pandemic on our communities, where people have lost jobs. Have they regained those jobs? Have they been able to go back and regain the things that they lost over that year where we were essentially home and couldn't go anywhere? So those are the stories that need to be told now, because while a lot of people are ready to move on and are ready to declare the pandemic over, it's not over, and we are not fully recovered. Our community is not fully recovered. So the journalism really needs to be focused there, is making sure that as we cover the recovery, there's a focus on equity. Who is recovering and who is not?
Panelists, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to make this a jump ball. Just speak up if you got something to say. I'm looking at my colleague Cheryl. I know she's got something to say. Jump right in.
No, Aaron said it perfectly. This was a pandemic that disproportionately impacted African Americans, and I have very strong opinions about it, but I think that it was handled all wrong during the Trump administration, and I think that cost a lot of lives. I'm going to leave that right there.
Yeah. I'll point out from my point of view, one thing that I certainly noticed is that the stats bore it out right off the bat, and I couldn't understand why it didn't get more attention, is that the chronic illnesses that have plagued our community for a long, long time, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, made you all the more vulnerable to COVID. And I always thought that would be the cover under which we could reframe the discussion and say we needed to deal with these things anyway. So let's finally get serious about tackling diabetes, about stopping and reversing diabetes diagnoses, dealing with obesity and so forth. It didn't work out the way I had hoped. Others.
I'll jump in to say that I think that the pandemic, in many ways, a missed opportunity for exactly that, to discuss, and deal with structural inequalities, which has not occurred. And right now, I think we're seeing from official Washington and state governments and city governments a real effort to sort of move on. The idea that the pandemic is over, we're done with the pandemic. The problem is the pandemic is not done with us. Right now, in Washington, there's a significant outbreak among official Washington, 2 cabinet members. While we were sitting here on this podium, Speaker Pelosi just tested positive for COVID. She said she's asymptomatic so far. We certainly wish her and everyone else well, but it is not done. There's a surge in cases coming. One of the truisms, sadly, with this virus, if it happens in Europe, it happens here a few weeks later. That is starting to happen. But beyond just even this wave, no matter how big or small it is, this moment, these last couple of years have shown just how broken the healthcare system still is, how unequal it still is. And I covered every single day of the Trump administration. They weren't too interested in trying to fix that. Right. And I think there's going to be a lot of pressure now on the current administration, but also Congress and city and state governments to do so. And at this point, it feels like the official response is, this is over, let's move on, as opposed to saying, this is a moment to try to make real change. Mm-hmm.
There was a time, like a very short period, as the pandemic was first kicking off, because I remember talking to epidemiologists and other doctors about this, and people who study underlying conditions, all of the things you're talking about that are actually more about like the social aspect of our lives, like what kind of education, what kind of schools are in your neighborhoods, the access to healthy food, all of those things that have caused the issues that folks had that made it easier for them to get COVID, that gave them underlying conditions. And one of the things that is an issue in Washington, D.C. political coverage is that if politicians aren't talking about it, it's hard for us to cover it. Does that make sense? Even when we know this deserves more coverage, it is hard to go to your editor and say, no, we should do this, when they're saying, well, is this a bill? Is anyone talking about this? And so what has been great to see over the last year and 2 years is the rise in folks who are willing to talk. The people like you who are out in the streets, who are talking to us and pushing your members of Congress to do things, because then it makes it an easier story to cover. And when you moving forward, you talk to this administration, both Lemire and I are on the White House team at Politico, about the kinds of things they want to do. This is a focus that they have, right? But they also need to be pushed. And Congress is not working on this as publicly as folks want. And as the story of fixing a pandemic, like you said, Pelosi just tested positive. There's no fixing a pandemic. This is going to continue. We are going to continue to have to get COVID-19 shots possibly every single year, like the flu shot. So this is going to be around. So it's also about, there's a new normal, quote unquote. How does the world change around that, right? How does healthcare get better? How do all these underlying issues, better schools, better education, so that when there is another pandemic, because Dr. Fauci said that's very possible in decades to come, how does the country react? And I have to say, as it was happening, I think all of us had this, it was concerning that it felt like we were caught flat-footed as a country for a pandemic, even though epidemiologists and doctors have been saying for a long time that this is something that could happen.
Hey, Harold, I'd like to be brief about this. As the owner of a hip-hop media brand that is heavily targeting millennials, Gen Z, our goal was to get young people to take it seriously and to engage young people, to be supportive of the elders and their family members, and be leaders in this space when sometimes traditional and mainstream news, it just misses them. So how do we have a society and media where the more sort of course respected news programs, the CNN, MSNBCs, and others, are covering one thing, but our young people just don't even pay attention to any of that. It almost just misses them. That's where we step in the gap. And that's why it's very important for us to cover things like COVID. And there were a lot of COVID activists that were young people who were trying. Some of us, like The Source and others, who tried to lead a socially responsible editorial calendar around these issues. You know, we were critiqued by some of our followers because they didn't understand it. But that's our goal, that's our responsibility, that's our charge. And that's why it's super important for us to get the support in black media, to get the support, because we're gonna step in the gap and cover things that traditional media don't find part of their news cycle. They're of a different mindset, not that that's not important, but we deal with things on another level. We cover the hood and what's going on with young people in the hood. And we need the hood to be good. And the information that they get has to come through trusted voices. No disrespect to a lot of people who come to these organizations about media, but they're not known. So for COVID, we did our best that we can, and we made it very serious that it was something that's an issue. And we'd love to continue that. We'd love to come on your show too, Errol. You know,
Okay.
you're my friend, but you know, we'd love to have more hip hop on his show. Let's give Errol a hand for the greatest political show on news.
City Hall. No objection here. They're wrapping me. They've brought us to the end of our time. I want to thank my panelists. Please join me in thanking our panelists: Aaron Morrison, Laudell McMillan, Jonathan Lemire, Cheryl Wills, Eugene, and also Skip Dillard. Thank you very much, panelists. And we will see you next year. And we also look forward to the good news expected out of Washington later today. Thank you. Thank you. Hey guys, they're gonna take a photo. Hi. Where do you want us?
Right here in front of the step and repeat.
Right here?
No, we actually need to take it in front of the step and repeat.
Where do you want us?
Right here. Everyone just take a step over so that we don't have the podium blocking us. Everyone just take a step over. Yeah, so we don't.
A couple of steps over.
All right, that's good. Yeah, just tight. There you go. Okay, everyone hold for my cross, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Hey, nice to see you. How are you?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Nice to see you. Oh, thanks. Very nice. Appreciate that. Yeah, we only crossed paths for like a minute.
Yeah, you were in the, I remember the sentence that we went into that's right.
I was just going to say, I remember coming to your office 100 years ago. Very impressive. Okay. Wait, my phone is off. Text me. Just give me a quick text, and then I'll hit you back.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks.
I don't have a card. I'm gonna give you.
Rev, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, all right. Let everyone. There's nobody. Let everyone take their seat. Shh. Let everyone take their seat. I need everyone to take their seat. Thank you. All right. All right, let me say that we have developed in the last several years a new group of people in elected office that I feel have become extremely important to the moving of the political agenda in this country in a more accountable and progressive way. And one of them was elected to the Congress from New York in the Yonkers area that has shown not only a progressive politic but a practical application. And I've got to know him, and I wanted him to address us at our national convention. He is in my opinion, a man to be heard in these times. Welcome to the stage, Congressman Jamal Bowman. Come on, y'all can do better than that.
Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2. There we go. Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? It's really great to be here with you all. God bless you all. Everyone looking good in the audience. Thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton, for allowing me to come here and say a few words. Please give the Rev a round of applause for his decades of leadership in terms of fighting for social justice, fighting for civil rights, fighting for racial justice. He's been doing it for decades. He was a boy preacher at the age of 12. He was in the streets in Brooklyn during the Tawana Brawley case. I was a young man. He's been doing it my entire life. I don't want to age the Reverend, but he's been doing it for as long as I've been alive. And I cannot go further without acknowledging my brother, the scholar, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, also on the stage. So as we think about, and the reason why I asked for a wireless mic, because I don't like podiums that much. I like to be as connected to the audience as possible. I don't like these barriers in front of me when I'm saying a couple of words. But as we think about an intellectual foundation for racial and social justice and the revolution that I believe black and brown people need in this country, we got to begin that conversation with Dr. Michael Eric Dyson and his intellectual foundation. Hey, y'all better not be laughing at me, man. We talking some serious talk over here. I also want to give a couple shout outs to my sister, Mayor Sean Patterson Howard, who is here representing the great city of Mount Vernon. I also absolutely have to give a shout out to my brother, former and always borough president, Ruben Diaz Jr. of the Bronx in the building. Absolutely. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Congressman Jamal Bowman, formerly Principal Jamal Bowman of Cornerstone Academy for Social Action Middle School. Now, before running for Congress, I worked in education for 20 years. I started my career in the South Bronx as an elementary school teacher. I then went on to serve as a high school guidance counselor and dean of students at the MLK campus about a mile uptown from here. I then went on to become the founding principal of my own middle school in the Northeast Bronx. I wrote a proposal. I thought the education system wasn't doing enough for our children. I thought the education system wasn't doing enough to unlock the unlimited potential of our kids. So I wrote a proposal and submitted it to New York City. And I made the argument that the city should give me the opportunity to open up my own public middle school. I made the argument in 2009, January, and by September, we opened up the Cornerstone Academy for Social Action Middle School in the Bronx. Now, I had the privilege and the blessing and a very humbling experience in running that school for 10 years. And when you look at the data, our Black and Latino students outperformed Black and Latino students across New York City while I was there at that school. But it wasn't just about their academic performance. It was about them learning their history and culture and how they created civilization before it was taken away from them. It was them learning about the continent of Africa and how Africa gave birth to Western civilization. And now that Western civilization is doing everything it can to choke the life out of our kids and our communities. And that's something we have to fight back against in everything that we do. So we did that work for about 10 years. We were innovative, we were creative, we were rooted in social action and social justice. But our kids were still suffering and our kids were still struggling. Now, why were they struggling? It wasn't because of anything innately wrong with them. It was because of government policy that has been violent against the Black community for hundreds of years. It's because housing insecurity is not an accident, it's by design. Food insecurity, it's not an accident, it's by design. Underfunded schools is not an accident, it's by design. Mass incarceration is not an accident, it's by design. Now, if our only answer, sidestepping for a moment, to the problem of public safety is more police, we're going to continue to fail our children. We better have real conversations about mental health. We better have real conversations about substance abuse. And we better have a war on poverty to finally end poverty in this country. Because as long as we have poverty, mental health disorder, substance abuse disorder, we're going to continue to have crime and continue to have an issue with public safety. So we have to get to the root causes of these issues. And that is why I ran for office in 2020. Because we had too many elected officials. Not Ruben Diaz Jr., of course, and not Mayor Sean Patterson Howard, of course, but we had too many elected officials that continued to sugarcoat the problem and continue to paint around the edges and not get to the core of the matter. And the thing that put me over the top in my decision to run was 34 kids died within the K-12 school system during the 2018-2019 school year. 34 kids. 17 died via suicide. A young girl, 14 years old, was being bullied at school. She had no one to talk to, no one to turn to. Right after school, she went to the top of a building in Co-op City and jumped off the building. Right down the street in New Rochelle High School, two students got into an argument, a disagreement. One student pulls out a knife, stabs the other, and kills her. This was the same year with the brother Junior, Ruben Diaz Jr. remembers this. The young man Junior was jumped in the case of mistaken identity outside a bodega and was murdered by a group of young men during this year. Also, the Parkland shooting happened in Florida, mass shooting at a high school. And no elected official really knew how to articulate what was happening with our children and connect that crisis to a crisis in our democracy in this country. Both of those things are connected. We cannot talk, we got to stop talking in silos. We got to stop talking in silos. Poverty connects to trauma, connects to education, connects to mental health, connects to mass incarceration, and connects to what's happening with our children. Let's stop talking in silos. So I said, you know what? We've done good work in education, but I think I might want to take a crack at running for office. I had no political experience. I had never run for office before or thought about it. But the other reason why I did it was this. I looked at the numbers, and I saw that the person who was currently in office was winning a congressional seat year in and year out with only about 20,000 votes. And I said to myself, Reverend Al, I said, I could knock on 20,000 doors myself and get enough people to come out to vote and win this election. But we didn't just knock on 20,000 doors. We knocked on about 90,000 doors. And we didn't just knock on 90,000 doors. We made 1.2 million phone calls. And we didn't just make 1.2 million phone calls. We built a diverse coalition of people across the district, young, old, black, white, and everything else, Muslim, Christian, everyone, to form a grassroots movement to help us win that election. And in doing so, we beat someone who was in office for 31 years. He was a political institution in and of himself. I am not saying that to brag. I'm saying that to acknowledge the collective power we have as the grassroots when we organize for transformative change. That is why I'm telling that story. So I stand here now as the first person of color, the first African American, and the first black man in U.S. history to hold this congressional seat. That happens because of the work of the National Action Network. That happens because of the brilliance of Michael Eric Dyson. That happens because of Ruben Diaz Jr. and Mayor Sean Patterson Howard paving the way. And that happens because of years of community organizing and community work. So here's my charge to all of us here today. I am now in the halls of power. But power for what? And power for whom? Is that power for us? Or is that power for someone else? As we think, not just in the present time, but as we think historically, we live in a nation of European settler colonialism. That is what we are living in, and that is what we are living through. That is what we have to reckon with and defeat, and that is why we have to come together to build a beautiful, multiracial democracy where people of color and women and marginalized people are at the table making decisions. If we ain't doing that, and if we are not providing a historical analysis of what the problem is and where we need to go, we just playing pretend. We just playing games. We can have all the conferences in the world, but if we're not having the right, honest conversations about the work that needs to get done, we will never get there. And I'll say this, and I'll end with this. I'm sorry, Reverend, if I went over a few minutes. Our work, my work, and all of our works has to be rooted in love. It has to be rooted in love. For me, as a former educator, that's love for our children, love for my family, obviously, my wife, my kids, love for our community, but love for the larger society as well. And I'll add, and this may sound a little weird, but love for our environment as well. And here's what I mean by that. We are living through a climate catastrophe. We are living through a climate catastrophe. That catastrophe disproportionately impacts black and brown people. That's why we were disproportionately the victims of COVID, because of the upper respiratory illness that has resulted from us living in places where they're burning dirty fossil fuels. This is a racial justice issue as well. So it's love for our kids, ourselves, our families, our community, and the environment. And that love trumps all fear, all hate, all anger, and all suffering. And through my life, I've had to work through my anger and my hate and my rage for European settler colonialism, and break through that and get to a place of love for not just my people, but all people, and love for the world. So my challenge to all of us, I'm not trying to be in Congress for 50 years and not getting nothing done. You know, I want to recognize, and I should have done this at the beginning, I need to recognize our ancestors and what they have done to pave the way for me to be here. And I'm going to recognize two in particular who passed away right before I got to Congress: John Lewis and Elijah Cummings. I need to recognize those two black men right there. My election was actually confirmed, my victory, on the same day that John Lewis passed away. Same day. That was a Friday. And I remember Reverend at the National Action Network in Harlem making that connection. One man passes on, another man comes in. So I take my role in Congress as serious as the power of that. They fought their entire lives to get us to this point. Now, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? We need a 21st century civil rights movement, because that is the only thing that's going to get Senator Manchin and Sinema and others to do what they need to do in the Senate. We need a 21st century civil rights movement and a 21st century human rights movement to transform this country and transform the world. God bless you. I love you. Enjoy the rest of the National Action Network event. Thank you.
Jamal Bowman. Congressman Jamal Bowman. Let me say, did we enjoy that? Can people, maybe we do need to move this so people on both sides can. We're going to now engage. Are you moving this? No, I'm just trying to find out. Osmosis don't work with me. I need somebody to tell me something. Okay. No, all we need to do is just move this. We don't need the table. We just move it. Thank you. Yeah, you can leave it there because we're going to pull it back after we do this conversation. I wanted to have a conversation with, I call him the Socrates of our time. Certainly the scholar, the most prolific scholar, public intellectual of our generation. I think every generation produces their own in every area, in every category. And if you were to tell your parents' heroes and who they identify with, they would be different than yours. Because every generation produces its own. Then you get those that are phenomenal, that are multi-generational in terms of their impact. One of the things that when I was younger and used to travel in and out with James Brown told me one day something that I'd never understood the impact till later. He said, I'm one of the few artists that grandma, mama, and the daughter know who they are. Most daughters know artists and their grandmama never heard of them.
Right.
And in our generation, those of us of that generation, certainly there's been no one more prolific, more studied, more well-read and regarded than Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. And I thought as we are engaged in now some real serious struggle and real serious point in history, that I wanted to have a conversation with him so he could put into focus for us where we are both as an organization, as a tradition, and then where we are in the country and the world. And then I'm going to do that for about a half hour. Then I'm going to let some of you ask him questions for about a half hour. Then he's going to sign some of his books that we have in the back, and it is a great book. So let me get started. Dr. Dyson, first of all, thank you for being with us. Give him a hand, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Dyson, first of all, you've written extensively about the whole Kingian tradition, Kingian movement, and you've put in perspective the roles many of us have played in that kind of lineage, because I think what people don't understand is there was always different silos in our community. You had, at the same time, Frederick Douglass, you had Garnett, you had others that dealt differently. So what King did may have been more known, but there were always silos. Where has the King tradition gone since Dr. King? And where does Nan fit in that?
Wow. Reverend Al Sharpton, the preeminent leader, not only of black people, but people of moral awareness and conscience in this society. Speaking about a multi-generational leader, a boy preacher since he's been barely 5 years old, and barely older than that right now, and still on...
Let the church say amen to that.
And still on the front line. I mean, I'm sitting next to the LeBron James of black civil rights and leadership. Jay-Z said, never been a brother this good, this long. I mean, think about it. Since you've been 5, and he might be over 50 now, and he's been on the front line telling the truth, never been a person this good, this long, this relevant. He ain't making rap records that you go, oh yeah, we used to listen to. He on the charts right now, right? And everybody coming to kiss the ring. Let's just be real. When they mess up, they got to fess up to Reverend Al Sharpton. And what I love about that, you see, the narrow-minded think of it as virtual spiritual extortion. That ain't what it is. What it is bringing our tradition to bear upon the foibles, the faults, the flaws, and the aspirations of human beings, especially leaders who are making serious impact on us as a people, and they know when they ain't doing the right thing, they have to be held accountable to this man. The first, and so far only, black leader that had to deal with a black president. Ain't nobody ever had to do that. Not Dr. King, not Jesse Jackson, right? Not Frederick Douglass, This is the only black leader who was the preeminent black leader that had to both acknowledge the historic legacy of Barack Obama and then hold him to account, not nastily. He ain't got to go outside. I was in the White House with him. I saw what he did. I saw him tell Obama that he ought to forgive Jesse Jackson. Ain't nobody told me that. I heard it with my own ears. So for those of you who thought he went up in that room and was shucking and jiving and selling out, that ain't what he was doing. He just didn't have to be nasty about it. You know how when you married, you ain't got to call your wife out in public. You ain't got to call your husband out in public. Hopefully. The grandma said where you did it is where you get it. But sometimes pull you before you go up to the microphone to slap. But what I'm saying, oh, I'm sorry. I'm just saying. So let me answer Reverend Sharpton's question. He comes out of a Martin Luther King tradition, and believe it or not, coming up in New York, coming out of Brooklyn, being part of a King tradition wasn't a sexy thing. It was Malcolm X. It was Stokely Carmichael. It was H. Rap Brown. Now, the genius of Al Sharpton is he had the aesthetic of an H. Rap Brown, the aesthetic of a Stokely Carmichael, and the youth of the younger revolutionary figures, but he had a Kingian spirit. And that meant that what we saw was the combination of the best of our tradition. The Malcolm X rhetorical fury, the reason Dr. King didn't necessarily want to get in no debate with Malcolm X, because Malcolm is throwing 10 shots a minute. Dr. King, you know, and Dr. King, well, now I think Malcolm. And by the time he said, "Nah, I think Malcolm done said 15 things. Look at you. You've been bamboozled. You've been took." So Sharpton can speak like Malcolm, but think like Martin. Think about that. Now, that was presaged to a certain degree with Jesse Jackson, right? Wearing the big fro. He might as well have been Snoop Dogg, right? To a lot of Negro leaders out of Atlanta.
Yeah.
I'm just keeping it real.
Yeah.
Right? So if he was Snoop Dogg, what was this man right here? This is Kendrick Lamar and Kanye. Right? Because he bore witness to a street culture that had been distanced from civil rights, seen as marginal, and he took on the major issue that now defines the civil rights movement, police brutality. He was doing it when it wasn't sexy. I know. I was there. Bourgeois Negroes were like, y'all done messed up. Y'all go to the police. Y'all go to jail. That's y'all business. Then bourgeois Negro children started getting arrested.
That's right.
Then bourgeois children started getting attacked. Then the police were assaulting us regardless of class. Then they started calling on the man they used to not call on at all. And then when the first black president came into office, the most unlikely to succeed became king of homecoming. And why is that? Because he comes out of a king tradition that holds power to consequence and to account without being vicious or nasty or denouncing the human being as a figure in his own right. When I think about where NAN fits in, NAN is remarkable. The trajectory of this organization over the last 30 some odd years, the trajectory of NAN being in the streets, in the suites, Political power acknowledging Reverend Sharpton, political power acknowledging that without him they cannot move forward, but the people in the streets still see him as the foremost leader and voice box and amplifier of their traditions, of their interests, of their anxieties, and of their desires. Never been a brother this good, this long to do what he does to represent us. And on Sunday morning can tune up. I see Reverend McKissick out there. He be getting on that McKissick. I don't know if y'all ever heard Reverend Sharpton. He ain't just doing the, Tillichian deontology and the kind of Helmut Tillich Baptist understanding of the world. He be moaning and hooping with the best of our gut bucket Mississippi bred moaners out here. That's another genius. I saw him up in Riverside Church do one thing, and then I've seen him in the Grassroots where he tunes up after taking a text and deconstruct it. Ain't nobody ever done that with that kind of range and that kind of authority and that kind of authenticity. That's who we got in the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Now, I want to throw to the audience, give me a mic in the middle. I'm going to let about 10 or 12 of you ask your questions to Dr. Dyson about what you want. I need a mic and somebody to stand here. Where? Okay. Yeah, if you got a question, you get in this aisle. I'm going to take 12. Give me 12. JT only, and cut it off at 12. Now this is to ask Dr. Dyson a question, not to get up here and preach your sermon. Derek, what are y'all doing?
We're in a shot, sir. Can we be in the middle aisle?
Oh, okay.
We're in a shot in the middle aisle. Can we use it?
Oh, okay. All right, we're in a shot there. Okay, Derek, stand there with them, because if they start preaching, take the mic.
Dr. Dyson, thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir.
When it comes to politics, the midterms are coming up. They're incredibly important.
Yes, sir.
But the narrative is that it's a fait accompli before anyone's even voted. How do we change that narrative? I understand historically that the incumbent party loses seats and all of that.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily have to happen.
Right.
How do we change the thinking in the media and beyond so that we're prepared to do the fight that's necessary instead of feeling like there's no need to fight because we're going to lose the fight before the fight's even begun?
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Ade.
Look, if it were the case that we were to predict what the likely outcome would be and therefore adjust our behavior according to the likely outcome, we would never vote, right? We would have never won nothing. But the reason we've been able to be successful as a people, as a voting bloc, that is overwhelmingly moving toward progressive politics, or at least liberal politics. We know that black people can have cultural conservative values, a 10 Commandments religion, and a progressive politic, right? That's what throws many Republicans off, because they think they can bring in some of the more acid, right-wing, vicious, anti-black sentiments and think because we have cultural values that are conservative that we'll somehow adjust to that. That ain't what the program is. So for me, I think that your point is well taken. Yes, we can say that in many instances, the opposite party will certainly be able to snag those seats, but we can't really afford to believe in a kind of inertia. We got to get out there and vote because it means a lot more to us than a lot of other communities. You see what they did to Ketanji Brown Jackson. You know, you do everything they say you're supposed to do. Harvard, check that box. Harvard twice, check that box. Do everything, make all the judgments, be balanced, despite them trying to go after her vis-a-vis this ludicrous, exaggeration of her record when she was in the mainstream. The point is that when you vote, you ain't just voting for somebody who's going to be the president or your congressperson or your senator. You're voting for the local DA. You're voting for the prosecutor. You're voting for the mayor. And when you vote, even when you vote in the higher office in federal elections, if presidents, 45 ain't there, but his legacy is on the Supreme Court. His legacy is on the judges. So I say all that to say we have more at stake than most communities. So we can't afford to have a kind of nonchalance. Ain't gonna make no difference no way. They already rigged the election. You hear that coming out the right wing. What we got to understand is that we got to get out there, dimple them chads, and pull that lever. I know they don't dimple the chads no more. Pull them levers and make sure you write in the right name, because what's at stake in the midterm election is you've seen the assault already on Joe Biden. You've seen the assault despite the fact that he's doing a lot more progressive stuff than many presidents over the last 30 to 40 years. So, and even if you got a problem with Joe Biden, understand what the option is. Understand what the alternative is. So when you vote on your congresspeople and your senators, when you vote on your local authorities, understand that they don't have to be perfect to be useful, number one. And number two, get out there and vote like you going to a Beyonce concert, like you going to a Maxwell concert, like you going to see Jay-Z or Nas or whoever your favorite Little Uzi Vert or some of these mumble rappers that I don't understand what they saying. Every time they walk by it, I said, okay, know what I'm saying? No, Negro, I really don't. So I think let's get out there and be as consistent about going out there to vote. And then I'll end by saying this. We know voter suppression is real. So while we fight on both fronts, we're going to argue against that. Look at what Stacey Abrams is doing. On the other hand, we got to show up ourselves regardless, or as the Negroes in the streets say, irregardless, so we can stand up and be counted. That's what I would say.
Thank you. And he's not lying about the mumble rapper. Thank you.
All right.
Give your name, where you from.
Sylvester Wise. I want to thank you for your support in African American studies throughout your history. And
thank you, sir.
I'd like to know, what are you thinking about the critical race theory and the numbers of young black students that are coming to the university with very little understanding of our culture,
right,
and a lack of interest in taking African American studies?
Yes, sir.
And are taking American history rather than African American history, American literature rather than taking African American literature. Where do you see how this critical race theory is going to affect us as black educators?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Thank you. And thank you for your service and for doing what you do, my friend. Look, we know most people don't know the difference between CRT and OPP. They don't white folk, black, nobody really know what critical race theory is. I was on a panel with one of the founders, Derek Bell, and also on another panel with Kimberly Crenshaw. Critical race theory simply says that the law can't be used to be depended on to be objective. That the blind justice always be peeking through the thing when it comes to us. Black person commit a crime, white person commit a crime. We get 15 more years and the white person gets a suspended sentence. That's not objective, and that's not true justice. So critical race theory is a theory out of legal circles, out of law schools, most starting at Harvard, but many other places. Marie Matsuda, Charles Lawrence, Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bell, Gary Peller, and on and on and on, multiracial. And what they say is, let's not look at individual instances of prejudice. Let's look at institutional mechanisms that perpetuate inequality. Let's not look at personal sentiment. Let's look at structural and systemic realities. That's common sense. That tells you it ain't just about you not calling me the N-word, therefore you good. But what are you doing kicking my kids out of school at 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years old? Why is it that black people continue to be the last hired, first fired? So critical race theory is simply saying, let's pay attention to the systemic and structural inequities. Of course you're going to have Josh Hawley, Senator Ted Cruz, trying to make something out of it like it's a mad and hateful thing, like you trying to teach young white kids to be ashamed of their parents. We ain't trying to make them ashamed of their parents unless their parents David Duke, right? But there's a difference between being shamed and ashamed. You ought to be ashamed of slavery. What, you proud of it? You ought to be ashamed of racism and Jim Crow and lynching Negroes. That's a shameful thing. But we ain't trying to shame you as individuals. I teach at now Vanderbilt. Before that at Georgetown. I done taught at white schools all my life because I'm a Negro Trojan horse. And I'm up in there trying to get young white minds to think differently about the resources of this society. Now, to answer your question directly, and I'll be quiet, Black history is American history. Black studies is American study. When you study our history, you're studying Crispus Attucks and Thomas Jefferson. We are on the full sweep of history. So I think it's incumbent upon young black kids to understand not to be distant from their own religious, racial, and sociological traditions. Embrace them. Martin Luther King Jr. was not just a great black leader, he was an American leader. He was a refounding father. So when you study our culture, you get the best of the contributions of history, of black studies, of sociology, anthropology, of literary studies. Langston Hughes, Ralph Ellison, Toni Morrison, Tony K. Bambara. These are rhetorical geniuses who have a great deal to teach the rest of the nation. So I say embrace our culture, learn who we are, don't let folk who are mad at critical race theory distance you from your own people and tradition, trying to alienate you from revolutionary and liberating traditions that can help emancipate the black mind and therefore the black body.
Thank you, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, always setting the mic on fire. Say what your name, where you from?
My name is Kay Merrill. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. My question, Mr. Dyson, is African American women leaders, particularly those who are activists.
Right.
How can we then shift the narrative in our communities where when an African American woman, be she single, be she one who is a mom with no husband,
right,
how can we then shift the narrative in our communities to validate her as much as we validate African American men?
Yes, ma'am.
It is very tough in the ministry
right.
for African American women. It's very tough in every field. But until an African American male or white male validates us, then that gives us credibility. Thank you.
Thank
God
you,
bless
sister.
you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Well, thank you for being one of those sisters, and I appreciate you. When it wasn't a thing, when Black Girl Magic and Black Boy Joy wasn't a thing, I wrote a book called Why I Love Black Women, right? And in that book, in fact, I talk about Angela Davis, I talk about Kimberly Crenshaw, critical race theory, years and decades, a couple of decades ago. So my point is that we have to value and appreciate black women. I got kicked out of a church in Johnson City, Tennessee for trying to ordain 3 women as deacons. Now, God got a sense of humor. The name of the church was Thankful Baptist Church. Yeah, me and God had a little argument about the name of that church. They changed the locks on me, and I went in one day. I said, oh, they must be trying to surprise me. Then I went to preach that morning, more people than I'd ever seen. I said, man, I must be getting good. And they were there to vote me out of that church, right? So the thing is that, you know what? We know that toxic masculinity, vicious misogyny, you know, unprincipled patriarchy is devastating the black communities. We know that black women have been on the front line for supporting black men from the get-go. When I go to these schools and they have issues with young black kids getting kicked out and young black men being mistreated, who's on the front line? Black women, right? And so we got to love black women. We got to acknowledge their leadership. right? We know they were at the foot of the cross with Jesus and told the story before the men were there. Men got scared and ran. But the women said, I ain't going nowhere, and stayed right in there. You know, when God created a black woman, God did something devastatingly original and incredibly brilliant. You know black women got the skill, so why you scared when you see a real woman show up? Why you get nervous, get femophobia, just get scared of seeing a real black woman? And a real black woman must be acknowledged for her brilliance, for her spirituality, for her leadership, for her intellectual credentials, and for her love and commitment to the men in her life and to her children. So I say, look, I ain't never been to a black church that turns down tithes from women. Right? Well, you can't come up on the pulpit, but they ain't turning down none of that green dough. So you got to start saying, if my money is good enough to reach the pulpit, so is my body. And I'm going to tell you what, I've been an ordained Baptist minister. I've been preaching for 41 years. When the women leave, I'm going with them. If they boycott the black church, I'm going to say, dudes, I love you, deuces. Because y'all ain't paying no tithes up in here. Y'all ain't at Sunday school early or by an hour to get the stuff ready to teach the kids. And I ain't dissing black men. I'm a black man. I love black men. But sisters have been not recognized for the work that they do, for the genius that they bring, for the commitment they have. So every one of us who are men, get on your feet right now and clap and celebrate black women. And then, after you sit down, support them. After you sit down, acknowledge them. After you sit down, vote for them.
Thank you, sir. Your name and where you're from, please.
My name is Smith Georges. I'm a community leader. I also ran for Manhattan Board President. Usually I see you on TV. It's a pleasure to see you face to face.
Thank you, sir.
And I commend you, highly commend you and Reverend Al Sharpton and others who are opening our eyes on issues that are of importance to us. My question to you, as a Haitian American, I'm just watching how the refugees from Ukraine are being embraced. The white refugees from Ukraine are being embraced. However, when it comes for the Haitians seeking asylum, and I see how the officers, immigration officers, on horses, or I would say the white robot on horses, chasing those Haitians under the bridge of Del Rio, Texas. And you know, this is kind of insane. What is your opinion on how whites are being embraced seeking asylum versus the Haitians?
Yes, sir. Well, you said it right there. And we ain't got to come down even to Ukraine. Let's start at wet foot, dry foot. Cubans being allowed, bless them, they should be. Haitians, not so much. On one island, Dominicans versus Cubanos, right? And the Cubanos, right, and the Haitians being hated on by their fellow Caribbean citizens, right? Let's just be real with that. And presidents who looked at the dry foot, wet foot, if you said sac passe, they passed you by. If you say me amo el señor, right, that's a different story. And we should all be together. Don't get it twisted. Cubans, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, African Americans, we should all be in the same boat. But dadgummit, if we in the same boat, let us have the same authority to be visited upon by the federal government of resources. And some people are coming in as refugees, and some are seeking asylum. So now when you come, look, we want to support the Ukrainians. Ain't nobody mad at that. But dadgum, if you got the Syrians who were dogged and dismissed and never acknowledged from the Middle East, and then when all the newspaper reporters, not all of them, a lot of them said, they're like us, they're European. These are white people, no disrespect, They're not black people who are refugees from some collar county of the world or country or banana republic. These are white folk. Look at the white supremacy on display. Look at the unconscious white bias on display. So while I support loving anybody who seeks asylum or who seeks refuge, start with the ones that have been there for so long, who have been seeking refuge from their plight and predicament, and you had a president who said they were blank hole countries. So already you know the mindset of what's going on. So change those policies so that Haitian Americans, Haitians who come to America, Haitians who seek a righteous place and position in our country are permitted that. Now let me say something else before I end. There's a lot of tension between Africans from America and Caribbeans and Africans from the continent and from their country. Just gonna be real with it now. Some of that is our fault on this side. Like we got the ability to condescend and talk about them when them is us, right? And on the flip side, we got some brothers and sisters coming in who, because they were raised in an all-black country, say, why you people always talking about racism? Well, you are taking advantage of our arguments for the last 400 years to have your black mouth heard and your black body respected. So on both sides, we got to acknowledge the internecine squabbling going on. We, at the end of the day, they shooting Abner Louima and George Floyd. Understand that we in the same boat together.
Thank you. Dr. Dyson, we got to get you to the book signing, so we only have about 10 more minutes.
Okay, I'm going to be real brief then. I'm going to be real brief.
All right,
These people
please.
right here, I'm going to be real brief. Yep, nope, maybe, I think. Okay, let's go. All right.
But he is doing, Dr. Dyson is doing a panel afterwards, but, you know, the books, money.
Yeah, 2 o'clock with Dr. Jamal Watson
Yes.
on the black public intellectuals. Yes, sir.
All right. So just ask your question.
I'm going to be real brief then.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Doctor, I usually see you on TV. I'm very happy to see you live.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm very happy to see you the way you acknowledge Reverend Sharpton. It's the same way I was thinking, and I'm very happy. And in the same yesterday also, the mayor, Eric, was very nice explain. My name is Mike Ilionan. I'm the president of the organization called Get Up, Stand Up for Haiti.
Beautiful.
My question to you, they're talking about the immigrant. My brother already take that part. What I will ask you, I see how powerful you are when you're on TV. And can you and Reverend Sharpton from NON put together a coalition with the Haitian community to help us with Haiti?
Yeah.
Because the problem of Haiti, the problem we have in Haiti is what the colon want. They want to destroy Haiti. They want to destroy Haitian because of what we did. So if you put ourselves together, we can save Haiti and then we can save all African. Thank you very much.
God bless you for that confidence, bruh. I be trying to save my neighborhood. It'd be rough up in there, but you know, a whole country. But yes, I'm going to commit on the part of Reverend Al Sharpton, who ain't here. He's already doing so much, though, believe it or not, vis-a-vis that issues. But yes, we will renew our efforts to reach out to our Haitian brothers and sisters to make sure that we are all in the same linked arms, linked aims, and linked aspirations, because it is a tremendous problem. And it's not something passing, and it's not a fad, and it's not something that we now do because it's trending. It's a deep and profound problem that persists, and I will commit my resources along with Reverend Sharpton to create that kind of coalition, or to strengthen it where it exists already. Thank you.
Thank you. Name and where you're from.
Good morning, good morning. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Winsome Pendergrass. I am a delegate member of the New York Communities for Change. And it is being said that war is bad. We know that war is bad. It is being said that 100,000 Ukrainians will be coming into America. There are 93,000 homeless people in New York. Before the pandemic, 123,000 children leaves out of a shelter every Monday morning to go into our public schools. I would like you to really deliberate on the nasty, disgusting attitude that all our elected officials give to NYCHA. Nobody care about NYCHA. Nobody care about the tenants. The new governor has not mentioned tenants or the moratorium in her speech. So I would really like you to debrief of what is happening to us and for us to be awoke. They're coming and they're not going to be living in NYCHA. We live in NYCHA and we need to be fixed.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I'm going to say amen. I mean, you're absolutely right. And look, we don't have to have a zero-sum game. It ain't either the Ukrainians or the poor, either the Ukrainians or the homeless, right? It's because we got enough resources, let's be real. But since they ain't doing that, we got to ask the real questions. And the real questions are, when it comes to our resources of our communities for which we pay taxes, y'all never seem to have no money. Right? But y'all, the pandemic has taught us where they got a will, they got a way. And when they want to hook you up, they going to hook you up. So there ain't no doubt that we got to keep pushing that issue, not to be xenophobic. We ain't mad at nobody coming in, but we're saying that we love and appreciate the Ukrainians who are up against it, but take care of those Ukrainians they disallowed to get out on time. Let's talk about the racist hierarchy that was a premise of exit in Ukraine. Even as we help them, even as we reach out our hands, we can't lie and pretend we ain't seen that either. And I see some historically black colleges and universities are taking in the Ukrainians. God bless you. But also remember those refugees from the heart of a ghetto and an inner city who need to be taken care of as well. It ain't either or, it's both and. So Sister Pendergrass, I'm down with you. Plus I love your brother Teddy Pendergrass's albums. I loved all them joints, man. For a love TKO. Okay, I love that. Yes, ma'am.
All right, we only have time for 2 more questions.
I tell you what, let's just get them. I'm gonna be real brief. If y'all can take less than a 30-second question, I hate the people standing up there. I'm gonna be real fast, but y'all ask me short questions, I'll give you short answers. Okay.
All right, you heard him. Short question.
Bonjour, salam. My name is Sylvie Bello, and I'm with the Cameroon American Council. We've talked about Ukraine, and I want to talk about Cameroon TPS.
Right.
Can you compare racism and anti-blackness, but also anti-Africanness in immigration? For example, when our ancestors, we had enslaved ancestors in the house and enslaved ancestors outside.
Right.
African immigrants, even within the black migrant community, are not talked about.
Right.
Especially Cameroonians who've been fighting for 5 years for TPS. Yet tomorrow, Secretary Mayorkas will be here to talk to black community members. And in your conversation, can you connect immigration to voter rights? Because the Latinos understood, right, that Puerto Ricans, even though they have citizenship, cannot vote. But if they have the Dominicans, they can vote and expand. If they have the Ukrainians, they can vote and expand.
That's important.
And it's that African Americans, we need to also understand that if Africans and black migrants don't have papers, we cannot expand the voting pool. Thank you.
Amen. All I'm going to say to that is amen. I agree with everything you just said. And you said it more brilliantly than I can say it. You said it more eloquently. We got to understand that. Let me briefly say this. The anti-blackness in immigrant communities, even among people whose resources are limited, shows you that all over the world, the demonization of darkness and the brutality against blackness is real, even in our own communities. Amen, ma'am. Amen with what you said.
Professor Dyson.
Yes.
Professor Dyson, my name is Kevin Kadavi. I'm a senior in high school in Long Island. And I read your book, What Truth Sounds Like, and looked at the effects of the 1963 meeting between Robert Kennedy and James Baldwin, and saw the effect that it had on Robert Kennedy and how it opened his eyes. And it made me wonder, how can we today create more moments like that, not just for those who are elected and are in office, but to all people who are detached and resigned from social action, from politics. How can we create for them Baldwin Kennedy meetings where they too become activists and they too become open to the issues that our country is facing?
I like to see high school students like this. I like to see high school students like this. You can tell that man he got it in him, don't he? Yeah, when you become mayor or governor, I want you to remember this moment right here. Look, it's extremely important for us to understand that we create possibility through challenge, through tension, and through accountability. And James Baldwin told the truth, Lorraine Hansberry told the truth, Mr. Smith told the truth. You talked to Mr. Smith. All right, very good. You a real one. So, right, that ain't the one necessarily that people would think, intuitively is the one to talk to, though he's one of the few left behind. So it is extremely important for us to understand the pressure we can bring to bear in a private meeting that can have public consequence. And Robert F. Kennedy met with Harry Belafonte, with Clarence Jones, with Lorraine Hansberry and James Baldwin, and they lit him up. He was mad at first, but then he got a different consciousness and changed his viewpoint. I believe we are obligated to speak to white politicians or politicians, period, who need to hear a different perspective so that we can encourage them, engage them, coerce them, cajole them to do the right thing. And that story shows us we have that possibility. Thank you, young man. Keep up the good work, bro.
All right. This is going to be the last question, Doctor.
Okay.
And then we're going to do the book signing in the back. We're lining up in this aisle right here. We are not signing. The authors, Reverend Sharpton, Dr. Eric Michael Dyson, are gonna only sign their name. So they're not gonna make out to whoever, my Uncle Jim, my grandma. They're not doing that. We don't have the bandwidth or the time to do that. So they will sign their name, and that's it. And there's not a lot of conversation. Try to get a quick photo if you must. This is the last question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Dyson, Deacon Ken Radcliffe, Central Harlem Roman Catholic Church, St. Charles Resurrection. Although I'm not speaking for them, two things. One, interesting observation in your comment. Ukrainians are referred to as refugees.
Right.
Our brothers coming from the South, Haitians, and other peoples of color, Mexicans, are referred to as, and Africans are referred to as immigrants.
That's it.
Interesting. And aliens.
And aliens, right, and aliens.
The other thing is the silence of the overall major religions, Catholic, Protestant, all, and imams as well as Muslim, on this holiest time of the year. Their silence in the face of what was happening to the sister, Brown Taylor, a judge,
Jackson,
as well as the immoral political suppression of the right to vote.
Yes,
Your
sir.
comment on that?
Yeah, the first thing, we in complete agreement with that, my brother. The second thing, you're so right. The immoral, as you said, suppression of our right to vote. That should tell us, those of us who go, oh, ain't no big deal. If it ain't no big deal, why they trying to take it from you? Why they trying to stop you from doing it? Please understand the value of voting. Not just people in this room who get it, but people outside of this room. Your kids, your kids' kids, your uncles, your aunts, your people in your neighborhood. Please understand that the right to vote is the most critical lever we have to pull in terms of registering our opinion about this democracy. And what they did to Sister Ketanji, but they ain't gonna stop her. They ain't gonna keep her from getting on the court. So let's get more people on the court like her who understand what their job is and who understand what the law is. These right-wing conservatives talking about original position. The original position had us as 3/5 human. The original position had us as marginal to the culture. The original position had us as persona non grata. That's why we got to keep standing up, keep speaking up, and keep coming together in conventions like this to make a difference. God bless y'all. I'll see you in the back signing the book.
Let's give Dr. Dyson a hand. At this time, please, on behalf of the National Action Network and Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton, books in the back are free. And books from Dr. Michael Eric Dyson are free. So go to the back, remember what was said. You're not going to get a long conversation. It's going to be his signature, and let's move on. Thank you very much.